to day 3 of FedTalks, presented by FedScoop. I'm Goldie Kamali, your host and CEO of Scoop News Group, and I'm thrilled you could join us today. Today on day 3 and our final day of FedTalks, we'll be discussing the future of the federal workforce, data analytics and AI, scaling innovation in the DoD, the future of work in the age of AI, reforming government tech in a pandemic, making healthcare smarter with AI, the role of technology in modernizing Congress, and how AI is bolstering cybersecurity. The goal for today is that you learn something new and leave inspired to do something big. Please tweet with us using the hashtag FedTalks. I'd like to take a moment to thank our diamond sponsors who've been incredible to work with and a huge support. AWS, Dell Technologies, Google Cloud, IBM, Intel, Leidos, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Qualtrics, Salesforce, SUSE, VMware, and Worldwide Technology. Thank you for your support. With that, let's kick off our program. I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker here to discuss the future of the federal workplace. Please welcome Emily Murphy, Administrator of the General Service Administration, and our very own FedScoop Editor-in-Chief, Billy Mitchell. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm FedScoop Editor-in-Chief Billy Mitchell, and I'd like to personally thank you so much for joining us this week for Fed Talks and National AI Week. Our first session today on day 3 is a fireside chat with GSA Administrator Emily Murphy, in which we talk about GSA's evolving role as a federal landlord in a post-COVID-19 world and how GSA has provided leadership to other agencies on moving to telework. Please note that this interview was recorded during the first week of November, prior to the election results being determined. Therefore, it does not address GSA's role in working with the upcoming presidential transition or any of the news that has emerged in recent weeks. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy this final day of Fed Talks.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Billy Mitchell, editor of FedScoop, and it's my great pleasure to be joined by Emily Murphy, Administrator of the General Services Administration. Emily, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Billy, thanks so much for having me here.
I'm really excited to chat with you today because I know there's been a lot of big changes underway at your agency, and a lot of them tied to this madness of the time we're going through in COVID-19. And you know, a lot of what I want to talk about today stems back to the fact that GSA really serves as the landlord of the federal government. You have many missions, but that's a big one. So let's start there. There's a lot of transition in how people are working in the federal government now, and there's not a lot of people in the office anymore. So I'd be curious, what is GSA doing to prepare for the future of federal real estate and the potential shift from physical office environments to a more remote work stance in a post-COVID-19 world?
It's a great question. It's one that we're spending a lot of time thinking about. Because to scope out the issue to begin with, we've got 370 million square feet of office space that GSA manages. And we're looking at agencies where in some cases they've got 60% of their workforce going in some cases they've got 5% going in. And it's a recognition that there is no one size fits all answer. But it's giving us the chance as sort of the federal landlord to be, and honestly, as trailblazers in telework, to look at how we would want to design the workplace of the future. So we've been pulling together what we call Workplace 2030, and which doesn't mean we're going to wait 10 years to have results, but means instead we're trying to figure out how do we take steps over the next 10 years to build the workplace that we want, one that accommodates and provides the flexibilities for the federal employees, lets them work the way they want to work, and that meets their agency's mission, helps us recruit and retain those employees, but also better uses space. Because some of the lessons we've learned are that there's no one size fits all. Some agencies need more SCIF space, or they need operation centers. Others need to have laboratory space, and how we're going to approach that problem is very different. Some may need workstations. but others may need spaces where they can be meeting either one-on-one or in large groups with the public. So trying to figure out sort of a series of test cases for what that space looks like. And then trying to figure out also how the technology we put into those buildings, that they're not just a warm lit shell, that we're giving them a total solution. Everything from the furniture that goes into that space to using our EIS contract to make sure that we have the right telecom, to thinking about, do we want arms on our chairs? Because when you think, people touch the arms on their chairs, and that's not an area that people think to clean a lot. Also, it means thinking about how do you create a culture, though, where someone who's teleworking more or even perhaps becomes a virtual employee doesn't feel like they are getting fewer opportunities than someone who's in the office. So it means also focusing on how we change our management, and we implement technologies that allow people who are working remotely to feel incorporated, that hybrid meeting experience. So the two of us talking right now, we might as well be in the same room. We can see each other. Yeah. But if two of us are in the same room and one person's a disembodied voice on a phone, they're missing out on a lot of that. So how do we find the answers and come up with that right balance? And so it's a project I'm excited about looking at. And I think that there's really a potential for a lot of savings, but also ultimately the potential for better workspace for federal employees.
I'm glad you mentioned the tech element of it, because telework is such a big part of what we're experiencing right now. And when you talk about GSA and telework, you guys have sort of long served as the gold standard in the federal government for telework. Before you came in, and even during your tenure as well. So I'd be interested to hear what the pandemic has taught you about the strategy and what you've been doing right, and what you might share with other agency leaders who might not be as far ahead and are now kind of realizing, hey, this is the future. We need to kind of pick up our feet, get moving.
So I guess one thing I've learned is that I'm very lucky. I worked for GSA from 2005 to 2007. There is no way that the GSA of 2005 to 2007 could be doing what the GSA of 2020 is doing. And I've got to give a lot of credit to the GSA leadership that came in between Casey Coleman when she was the CIO of GSA. Mm-hmm. David Shive, who has been the CIO for I think 6 or going on 7 years, that they invested in the systems so that we were able to be the first agency, our first major agency, to go to mandatory telework across the board. We did a March 10th test, and we sent everyone home. We gave them a series of exercises, and we said, all right, we're going to really stress test our systems. It worked so well that on March 16th, we were able to send out a note saying that starting March 17th, everyone teleworks. I think what I've learned from that is that it's my job to keep building that foundation and keep investing in the newer, better technologies that we need, so that GSA continues to be at the forefront of telework and at the forefront of technology innovation, because that's the way that we're going to attract and retain talent. I've actually had conversations with employees who said that they chose GSA because of our IT. Mm-hmm. And I want to make sure that we continue to be the agency that does that, but then also shares what we've learned with other agencies.
And one quick follow-up, there's obviously the technology, but there's also the need for a willingness of a leader like yourself who's going to support that. And we've seen in other places across government that perhaps people might doubt that people are working during such an environment. So what about the sort of change management and the culture for acceptance and sort of that air cover that somebody at the top needs to provide to make something like that successful?
So back in August, we actually got our senior leadership team together, which means on a Zoom call, and we all had read a book called Remote, and it was based in, I think it's the 2013 book. We used that as sort of the bouncing off point for what do we need to be doing to make sure that what we're doing now is successful and what we're doing in the future is successful. We're meeting it again at the end of November to talk about new strategies also. So how do we do a better job of managing remotely? How do we do a better job of preserving culture remotely? How do we do a better job of this hybrid technology meetings that I was talking about? So it's definitely it means we have to keep stretching, not just from a tech side, but we have to stretch from a management side also to make sure that we've got the information and the measures and that we're providing the leadership that's needed, but that we're also providing the opportunities. Because if someone who's working from home doesn't feel that they're getting the exposure or the chance to work on new projects, then they're also not going to be able to grow in their careers, and we're going to lose them. And that's going to be a loss to the federal government.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. Continuing on the element of tech, obviously outside of the telework stance, GSA has done a lot during this time of COVID-19 in helping other agencies, just to up their digital services in response to, providing services to citizens across the country during this critical time. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I know I've talked to some people such as David Shive and others throughout GSA about that, but I'd love to hear how GSA will continue to serve as sort of tech consultants through the TTS and AT&F, PIF programs, all those, for the rest of the government moving forward. And then, AI is a big thing we're talking about this week. So I'd love to hear how that's playing a role as well.
There's so much to talk about. I feel like we could do an entire session just
Absolutely.
on that question. So I'd say the Centers of Excellence, we have just recently announced that we added a new agency partner. The JAIC, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center AI, Center of Excellence, has now been operating for a year and has been incredibly successful. And I'm proud that the very first project we worked on was humanitarian response. The long term, we're looking at it, trying to make sure that the contract vehicles we're putting in place, we've done a lot to try and consolidate schedules, looking at next generation GWACs, trying to provide buying guides, but we're trying to incorporate all of those new cutting edge technologies into those contracts. So STARS 3, which is currently going through the evaluation process, the Polaris GWAC that we've been talking about, that's still in the RFI process. As we move forward with each of those, or even Alliant 2, which is out there already, those are all helping implement AI, machine learning, robotics process automation across the federal government. And TTS through its COEs, as well as other parts of GSA, are there providing that technical expertise, whether it's through the community of practice or through specific one-on-one engagements with agencies.
So let's close today. We're kind of closing in on time with a personal question. You're nearly 3 years into your tenure as GSA administrator. Obviously, you've spent some time at GSA prior to that, but now you're running the entire agency. I'd love to hear about your proudest moments as GSA administrator, and then kind of alternative to that, what have been your biggest challenges during that time?
It's always hard to answer this because there's so much of that credit goes to the leadership team and the people of GSA who've done a lot of hard work in the last 3 years. But when I came in, I said that we wanted to provide ethical leadership, reduce duplication, increase transparency, and improve competition. And those were my goals. I'd say my proudest achievement, though, is that we've kept GSA employees safe. Our COVID rate is very low compared to the population at large. And when you consider that a lot of GSA employees actually go into buildings to deal with cleaning or COVID incidents in those buildings, that really speaks to the fact that we've been prioritizing their safety and taking the right precautions. I'm proud of the schedules consolidation work that's happened. We have over 99% of the schedules consolidated in one contract. We have $20.3 billion in savings that we've delivered in 3 years. That our small business numbers are up substantially, and that our customer satisfaction and vendor satisfaction scores and our employee satisfaction scores are actually all at the highest levels in the history of the agency. So we've managed to find ways to deliver services and deliver value in a way that works for agency customers, our industry partners, and the GSA employees who have to implement those solutions. We've improved our supply chain security. That's going to remain a challenge. Our competition levels are up, and I have been so fortunate. I've had such a great team that, COVID-19, the government shutdown in 2019, none of those things have daunted GSA at all. We've instead been able to grow from a contracting standpoint. When I took over GSA, we were doing about $55 billion a year in government contracts. It looks like in 2020 we did $75 billion in government contracts.
Wow.
So it speaks to the fact that listening to our customers and listening to our vendors has really paid off.
That's great to hear. GSA has always been a hotbed of innovation as long as I've covered it, and no different under you. So I look forward to following what you guys do, especially as you move forward in that plan for the future of the government space in 2030. It's really exciting stuff, but we'll leave it at that for today. But I just want to thank you so much again, Emily Murphy, for all your time and everything you do.
Billy, thanks so much for having me here.
Absolutely.
Hello, we're excited to have you join us today for Data Analytics and AI at FedTalks. I'm Dave Nazepper, and I'm a tech reporter at FedScoop. Joining me are Ted Kauk, Chief Data Officer at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Dr. Gil Alterovitz, Director of AI at the Department of Veteran Affairs, and Vimesh Patel, Chief Technology Advisor for Public Sector at Worldwide Technology. With introductions out of the way, I wanted to dive right into Q&A today. And the first thing I wanted to ask about is, how are chief data officers interested in expanding data sharing and partnerships in the Year 2 action plan tied to the federal data strategy? And what do you guys think that could mean for cognitive technologies? Ted?
So thanks, Dave. Thanks for the opportunity to participate here. I think it's important to highlight that agencies across government have established the CDO position this year. And certainly having that cadre of folks who are positioned to think about the opportunities for data sharing is going to be an important component of our ability to do so effectively. We do have the federal data strategy for the first time, which provides that common roadmap for the next 10 years. And it's really those annual action plans, the first of which was 2020, that are helping us to focus and prioritize our activities. Overall, it's a very aggressive plan of actions and milestones for the first year. And I do expect that in 21, we'll see some very similar actions to follow on and build upon those foundational processes, things like establishing data governance boards, inventorying our data, and assessing our workforce and infrastructure. The Federal Chief Data Officer Council has been working on collaboration and discussions that are leading into broader opportunities for data sharing. And in fact, one of the working groups we established recently was a data sharing working group. And the goals of that working group are really to get our arms around getting a more comprehensive list of all the data sharing use cases that are common across federal agencies. So why do we share data, and who do we share data with? Documenting those challenges, what constraints are those? Those might be legal, they may be policy, or they may be technical challenges. And then working together to identify those best practices, and also potentially recommendations on legislative or policy changes. So I think this will be some foundational work that's going to lead into some broader opportunities overall.
Yeah, and Gil, I was curious to get your thoughts as well. How do you think that that potentially the second year of the federal data strategy might pave the way for AI?
Yes, so I think there's a number of areas there when we're looking toward expanding and working toward obtaining new talent around the federal workforce and data science. We can look to leverage that. So as that expands, we'll be able to use that. We've been using currently a program at the VA called the Big Data Scientist Training and Enhancement Program, which works by basically combining academic fellows with VA researchers and and data to develop that trainee talent. And we actually just like in the last few weeks, actually just recruited a fellow who became a full-time employee in the Institute is from that program directly. So there's a number of programs that are possible within the agency level, and this is really great to see that there's a kind of a cross-government opportunity to really be able to leverage existing talent and potentially also develop new talent. So it's really, I'm looking forward to be able to leverage that program and to be able to work with colleagues across the federal space.
I'm glad you brought up talent too, because I've been speaking to a lot of CDOs in my day-to-day job, and I've heard from many that there's interest in expanding the federal data science training program. So I was curious how that too could help kind of set the stage for cognitive technologies. Ted?
Yeah, I think this is one component of a larger focus. Like, Gil was talking about some aspects of this, where agencies are assessing their workforce, understanding what the broader needs are for data acumen, in addition to data science skills, to be able to help us leverage our data as a strategic asset. We are exploring opportunities like federal-wide hiring actions for data scientists so we can attract that talent. But the data science training program is a really great example that you mentioned of where we're looking to upskill talent within the government. We have participants who are going to be immersed in design thinking, data visualizations, and statistical analysis. And of course, being exposed to more advanced machine learning and AI techniques. I think that's important. I think it's also important that as this cohort goes back to their agencies, that they are engaging and listening and working and integrating, because we know that working on data science is a team sport. And so I think that's part of the broader effort. I think that we also will be looking at how to build upon that for future programs. The Federal CDO Council also has a data skills working group. And so we're staying plugged in. We're also exchanging best practices to support CDOs and organizations overall in the work that they're doing to upskill. But overall, I think this focus and attention on data skills is going to have a significant impact, and we just need to keep up the pressure and keep up the excitement around the opportunities that exist.
Now, Vimesh, I wanted to turn to you, and obviously industry collaboration is going to be a big component of early AI use cases and ensuring their success. So I wanted to get a sense for what you see as industry's role as agencies start their initial forays into cognitive tech.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and thanks for having me here. I think industry has a really big role because a lot of the use cases that we see in government are not specific to the government. They're occurring all over. I'll give you a good example. Industry didn't really have a lot to do with data privacy 15 years ago. It wasn't really significantly important except for a few industries, and the government had to worry about it a lot. Fast forward today, and data privacy affects almost every industry, right? Social media, finance, healthcare. And industry is really caught up in that space as an example and has quite a few privacy enhancing technologies that the government could take advantage of. This goes, this is just one example, but it goes on and on that there's a lot of things that industry is doing, predictive maintenance, image recognition and analytics, natural language processing, that can directly translate into government use cases and support the government. And it'll really help quickly improve outcomes by leveraging those kinds of technologies. There's a bunch of other areas that are uniquely government that probably industry isn't doing necessarily in the way the government needs things to be done, and I would expect the government to really be the primary investment driver there. But albeit that would be in conjunction with industry and academia as well.
And Gil, I wanted to get your take as well on sort of industry collaboration. How are you seeing that play out at the VA?
Certainly. So there's a major role for industry collaborations, and we're seeing that in a number of different spaces. We're seeking to engage with industry and others through a number of avenues. One that's actually about to start is the AI Tech Sprint. I think we'll be hearing a little bit more about that in one of the later FedTalks sessions today. And we also have other ways of working with industry through these cooperative research and development agreements that allow us to work together around a common goal and leverage the VA data toward the mission to helping the veterans. So there's a lot of different ways of working together. We're working, as was kind of mentioned by the last speaker, around areas such as privacy preserving AI to enable new ways to work with data and making sure that to the data itself and the models are kept private and secure, and the data itself is the privacy is maintained while you're working with some of the leading edge products and technologies by these different companies toward helping the health and the well-being of the veterans.
So I want to dive a little bit deeper into sort of early AI use cases, starting with you, Ted. Maybe you could share a little bit about what USDA is doing and some of the early lessons you're learning.
Sure. Well, great question. And we've been engaged in AI and machine learning for a number of years. So some early use cases. Always like to share things about USDA that folks may not know that we are engaged in. So we actually, at our agricultural marketing service, we grade all the cotton in the United States. And so we use equipment and machine learning and computer vision that reduces the level of manual work that's required to grade that cotton. And because we charge users for our services to grade that cotton, it reduces the cost to the end customer by implementing those kinds of technologies. We also use computer vision in geospatial imagery to come up with yield data for crops across the country, which helps us do historical analysis of weather imagery and correlate that with local yields. Operationally, we are using machine learning to actually reduce the amount of effort that it takes for our agencies to do repairs for our facilities across the country using natural language processing. So using things like NLP to automate expense reviews, which reduces the manual work that has to go into those kinds of things. So there are a number of use cases that we're engaged in, also using NLP to look at the impact of our research. So understanding by using patent and trademark data how our research leads to patents and where it's most effective. So I think those early insights are, one, raising the average executive's expectations around the insights that are possible, and they're beginning to speak and ask questions with the knowledge that we can answer questions that might have been traditionally more difficult to answer, and we can reduce the work that we have to do as an agency to get the job done. I think we're also really focused on getting to standard tools so we can be on platforms where people can collaborate and fully leverage our data as an enterprise. So we're working on testing out enterprise tools where requirements are coming in from our component agencies. So this larger collaborative effort, in addition to communities of practice, is helping us to share our resources and to learn together. I don't know if we have any one or two major lessons learned regarding that, but I think rather little lessons that are learned iteratively along the way, and really excited about how that's developing.
Vimesh, I'm curious if you're seeing something similar in your early work with agencies in terms of, is it more of an iterative process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I spent 20 years in the federal government and the last 3 in industry. So I've had a good chance to kind of really understand what a lot of different folks are doing, and generally kind of falls into 2 camps. One is they say, hey, I think artificial intelligence and machine learning can help me. I'm going to be very surgical, right? I'm going to pick a couple areas where I think I can have, defined outcome with defined measure, and I'm going to prosecute those, really, really well. I'm going to focus really hard on them. And, what we generally like to do is sort of say, let's identify those use cases. Let's map those to the kinds of analytics and techniques that would be, best used to satisfy those use cases. Let's map that back to the kinds of data that you need, and then let's map that to the technology that you need to underpin all that. You do run the risk of running into a few different silos, but I've seen that as the best way to get started. The other way I've seen is an agency or an organization or a commercial entity will throw a lot of money at it. They'll build out a big data lake. They'll start buying all these technology platforms. They'll hire a bunch of people, and they'll end up with like a data swamp without really any clear objectives for how they're going to derive value out of it. So, Vimesh's opinion, start with very specific use cases. It's okay if you end up in silos, because once you understand those use cases, you will know a lot more about what you need to scale and grow from there. So that's kind of the two ways I see it, and then obviously my perspective on the best way to get started.
Now switching back to over to VA, Gil, I had an opportunity to cover a couple months ago your early efforts on what you termed as AI to go delivery model, which was being used to assist medical centers during the pandemic. I'm curious if you could give us an update on that. How are things going, and where do you see things kind of headed?
Certainly. So just to kind of summarize, this project originally started as kind of Vimesh was saying that we're thinking about use cases, right? What are specific use cases, and then you can build from that, right? In this case, that use case was developing this individual risk prediction for different outcomes around COVID-19, so that you can plan if someone has a positive COVID genomic test. You can plan for their care. And so an AI model was developed to do that, given the different medical record data that's available for that patient. And so since then, we've actually had over a dozen sites have expressed an interest in this piloting, and we've created the different templates and the forms for people to work with that. But most, so that is a use case, is an ongoing one. But I think the next point is really basically that, as Vimesh was saying, what I think is kind of really important is that we're now using that to generalize and to create it as essentially a new platform, so that artificial intelligence research and development can be essentially added as modules in the future, this AI to go concept. So it's not just the one that we did as an example use case, but others, so that you can actually, just by sharing an internal a secure web link, once that AI technology and health application has been thoroughly vetted, anyone, any medical center within the VA, the different hundreds of medical centers, thousands of different facilities, and all the different people who are involved in the care can actually access the module. Will just be basically appear within their dashboard reporting system. So that's kind of where this is going now. So both in terms of piloting the specific use case, but then also working on generalizing it so that it could be applied in other use cases as well. So it's really an exciting time to be able to move so that we can actually take the latest cutting edge developments and help the veterans directly by taking that quicker into the clinic.
Now we have a little bit of time left, so I just wanted to get everyone's sort of final thoughts on data, AI, analytics. What do you think, what do you want the audience to really take away from our discussion today?
Well, I really like a couple of things that Vimesh and Gil hit on in the most recent questions, which were really about focusing on the questions that matter to people in the organization, and letting that be what dictates the solutions. We don't want AI and machine learning to be a solution in search of a problem. We want to understand people's real problems and needs, and then meet them appropriately. So there is I think a variety of needs around government where decision support can be implemented with very simple aggregation of data, and then leading up the kind of maturity scale toward more sophisticated AI and machine learning. So this virtuous cycle is really about showing people what's possible, and then building upon that toward an approach that is holistic. And so I think both the training that we talked about, the workforce upskilling, asking the right kinds of questions, and getting executives positioned so that they're comfortable and feel confident that they can ask more rigorous and difficult questions, overall is a virtuous cycle for the government. And I think that it's going to continue to bear fruit increasingly over the next 3 to 5 years. So really excited overall to watch all of those components kind of come together and the best practices and hearing from other leaders like Gil and Vimesh about our opportunities together.
And Gil, Vimesh, any final thoughts?
Well, I think kind of Ted summed up really well. Like there's a lot of opportunity right now. There's a lot of potential, and by working together across government, by leveraging what industry's been developing, some of those cutting edge approaches, we can really take and leverage that data as this strategic asset, essentially, that can really make a difference for the different missions. And so it's really great to see a lot of the work going on across the federal government and across different parts of the organization. You know, it needs to combine the data aspects, and there are different parts that are working on that within different organizations, and different parts working on the technologies parts, and different parts working on different parts of the mission around health and well-being. And so it's by working together that we can really make the biggest difference for the mission, both within the agency, but also across the agencies, and then with the different industry partners and organizations. So I think that is kind of the message that I think is really important to keep in mind, that by working together, we can really get a lot done on this. There's a lot of potential.
Yeah, Gil, you said something that resonates with me, right? Data is a strategic asset. And I think in the government, we are really just beginning to realize this and understand it really well. And, you know, what I'd like to see is, you know, our continued mutual effort to bring that data to people, you know, whenever and wherever they need it, and at the level that they are, right? If you're really good with Excel and that's how you analyze and understand data, then data should be available to you that way. If you're a data science ninja and you need another set of capabilities, when we do that, when we bring data to people the way they need it, I think we're going to see so many new outcomes, from improved citizen experience to transforming the way the government really supports, you know, everyone. And I'm excited about the opportunities and challenges in the future.
Well, that's a good note to end on, and I'm stealing the phrase data science ninja. Thank you guys for your time today and for your insights. And thanks to our audience for tuning in. We hope that you enjoy the rest of Fed Talks.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Fed Talks. I'm FedScoop Editor-in-Chief Billy Mitchell, and I'm joined now by Dorothy Aronson, CIO and CDO of the National Science Foundation. Dorothy, it's so great to talk to you. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thanks, Billy. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Always a pleasure to chat with you. You always have great things to say, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say today about the federal workforce and federal reskilling and upskilling efforts. So let's dive right in. There's a lot going on in this space. Obviously, there's some government-wide programs hosted by the CIO Council that we've heard of. But I wanted to start today by giving our listeners or our viewers a little bit of context when it comes to reskilling and upskilling. I feel like these terms get conflated a lot and are used interchangeably, but I assume there's a little bit of a distinction when it, you know, comes to the usage of those two words. So I'd love to hear, you know, what's the difference between reskilling and upskilling, and is there one that makes more sense for the federal space, or is it, you know, something that, you know, in different contexts, one's better than the other?
Well, there's really pretty significant difference between these two words, even though they sound alike.
Yeah.
So upskilling is where a person learns new skills in order to do their current job differently or better. And this happens when technology is introduced into a job that may have been more or less manual before. So when people move from using regular old arithmetic to adding machines, and from adding machines to computers or Excel or whatever, those are all upskilling opportunities. Whereas reskilling is when a particular industry is completely changed. And so you have to move from being, say, an accountant to being a yoga instructor or something, you know, completely different. So the reskilling is when a person in the middle of their career really needs to make a major change.
And actually, I think that I believe in the future, there's going to be a lot more continuous reskilling and upskilling because of the advances of the rapid advances of technology.
That's a great start. So as I mentioned when we began, there's a couple different programs that are either in the past or currently ongoing. There's the Federal Cybersecurity Reskilling Academy, and then there's an ongoing upskilling program on data science. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the progress of those past and ongoing initiatives. And, it seems like these are really effective ways of building a stronger and more competent technology workforce within the government, because as we all know, the federal government really has a hard time recruiting and bringing in new people. So this gives opportunity to kind of boost the skills internally. But I'd love to hear how those programs are going, and if that's the case, about injecting new talent from within.
So it's really interesting to think about what makes a federal employee, what makes a person decide to join the federal government. And most of us are inspired by the mission. And so the thing we know and we care about most is the mission within our agency, rather than the specific skill that we use to move that mission forward. And the things that federal employees know is the business of government, which is not easy to learn. So what I like to see these reskilling academies work, because they maintain the knowledge, they allow us to retain the knowledge of the business of government, and keep those people who are inspired to serve working, even though their skills, their prior skills were no longer sufficient to do the job. So where we are, there's always a lot of retraining, reskilling opportunities going on in the federal government. And like a couple of years ago, one of the big ones in the news was there's a cyber reskilling academy where people were very competitive approach to getting people involved in learning. This was really a reskilling effort where people from different areas were brought together in order to learn new about how to be cyber experts. And the program was great, and the people were inspired. And we learned at the end that they needed practical experience in order to really be absorbed into the workforce in the cyber area. And so CISA, which is an organization within DHS, took that learning and has multiplied the value of that program by adding a 9-month detail on the end, so that people who come through that program are already ready to enter the door as cybersecurity experts. So these pilots are really important in that they build on each other. A year ago in the data area at NSF, through the CIO Council, we funded something we called the Udacity experiment, which was a really cool online program that people across the government were able to participate in. And they loved it until they got to a certain point. And what we were hearing about in the middle was people were loving the program, and they were going back and teaching their coworkers what they were learning and applying it on the job. So this is an upskilling opportunity. And the big difference there was that it was great because people could take the technology skills that they were learning and apply them immediately. But what happened in this program was that when the upskilling went beyond what they needed in their daily work, they became less connected to the program. Mm-hmm. So we keep learning. And so this year, what we're doing in the data area under the CIO Council is we are funding a program where the people are already IT people or people in the data industry, and we're upskilling them in place. So, and only to the extent that they need. And we're giving them capstone projects and things that apply at their current jobs so that they get credit for doing work with the skills they've learned at their current jobs. So those are just a couple of examples of things that have been going on, and it's very exciting to watch.
Yeah, it is. It's very exciting to watch, and it's great to hear that there's a little bit of learning from the administrative side. That there's adjustments and there's that kind of agile approach that we're not going to get it right the first time, but we'll make it work down the line. I know that the data science one that's currently ongoing is all virtual. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I imagine that's something we're going to have to deal with for quite a while. And it could, in fact, be an opportunistic point where we can actually give people more training. We can learn another learning opportunity in this to kind of expand this current virtual environment and train more people. So I'd love to, you mentioned Udacity. I know that's an online program. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, this changing move to virtual remote work and how it might provide people more opportunities to train up just because people are used to working in this kind of new remote workplace.
Right. I think that when I think about virtual learning, I think about it in two ways. There's online courses where individuals learn asynchronously, and then there's virtual like Zoom, there's teaching in a virtual environment.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those are good for different kinds of people. And I think that the pandemic has inspired us all to focus on doing whatever we do in our daily lives online. So I've seen both of those kinds of programs move forward. I kind of mentioned earlier that there was a capstone project, which for those of you who don't know, because that was a term I only learned a couple of years ago. So at the end of certain degree programs, you do big projects using what you've learned, and so those are called capstone projects. And so in the data science area, we're doing a lot of these capstone projects because they help the people, even if you're learning virtually in an asynchronous way, at the end you get together as teams and work on projects. And the reason I think that's very important is that I believe the best way you continue to learn and use the way you learn is by applying what you've learned. And also by sharing what you've learned with others. And in the data science area, people build on each other's
Mm-hmm.
products. So one person will build an algorithm or a basic component that other people can then use. And so all of this networking, learning how to work as groups is a very important component. And I think that the virtual learning or the allows people in different locations and with different data problems to work together. So it's really a very interesting cultural shift from the kind of schooling I was used to.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So we know that reskilling and upskilling are probably, it's only part of the arsenal, if you will, of what the federal IT workforce or the CIO Council is thinking about when it comes to the federal IT workforce. I know that the CIO Council recently came out with a report kind of assessing what the state of the IT workforce and sort of those efforts to boost it look like. So I'd love to hear what some of those other supplementary efforts are and sort of some of the top conclusions that came from that report.
Definitely. The CIO Council published this report, so go to cio.gov and read the entire report by yourself. It's actually not too long, but it did come out with 10 different kinds of recommendations for things that people could do to help upskill upskill is not the right word, to empower, to make a more powerful, stronger technology workforce for the federal government. And it included a really broad range of things about retention and hiring, and training was definitely one of them. One of the things that I feel strongly about is that the skills of the future that are really important are more general. So where a lot of what we've been talking about, has been specific technology skills, I think it's possible that a technology workforce that understands technology but doesn't have to understand the detail of all the technology innovations as they evolve is probably important. So being a really excellent project manager, for example, is one of the things that the document recommends, along with things like being a good part of a procurement team. you know, since a lot of what we do is feds working with contractors, you know, being a member of a procurement, assessment, evaluation, understanding how to make good purchasing decisions is very important to feds. But also, you know, how do we reward outstanding performers? That's something I wouldn't need to know because, you know, not being an outstanding performer. But for other people, that would probably be an important retention skill. And then, you know, leveraging hiring authorities. There's been a lot of special attention paid to bringing on cyber workforce and being able to do that more quickly, so that when you make an offer, by the time you go, you know, after the interview process, we cut the time to hire. So all of those things become very important in grabbing the right skills off the market when so many other people are looking for those same people.
Yeah, for sure. So as we close out, we have just a little bit of time left, but I'd love, you mentioned some future skills. I'll take those words out of your mouth, and I'll ask you, you know, for those people in the audience today watching who are interested in upskilling or reskilling or just general training, refining their skill set, what sort of emerging skills or training skill areas would you recommend that they look into to sort of make themselves ready for the future in the federal IT marketplace?
So for those of you listening who are, say, in elementary school, I think you should be, you know, getting along with others. Teamwork is important. Being able to share ideas clearly is very important. For those of us who are a little bit older, you know, I think data science and data analytics is fascinating, a really growing field. Also, if you're interested probably in earning a lot of money, now is the time to dive into data science because, you know, striking while the iron's hot. It's an emerging area. But really, I just believe that communication, empathy is a very important skill. All of these things, as we move forward, I believe that we will be mixing it up a lot more. So it will be fewer tech people just talking to tech people, but it'll be, you know, a mix of people talking to each other, and we need to be able to understand each other.
Absolutely. That's what I always hear. You need some, not just diversity of in the traditional sense, but diversity is thought and skills, and not non-traditional tech skills being inserted. So that, I totally hear that. Dorothy Aronson, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. This has been a great conversation. So I appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day at FedTalks.
Thank you, Billy. Bye.
Bye.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jackson Barnett. I'm an editorial fellow here at FedScoop, and I'm joined by Liz Reynolds, the executive director for the MIT Task Force on the Work of the Future, and Melvin Greer, chief data scientist for the Americas at Intel. Today, we're going to be talking about something incredibly important, the future of work in the age of AI and how artificial intelligence will impact the economy and the people in it. And to begin, I want to turn it to Liz as a way to level set and to introduce and start a very complex topic, unfortunately with the short amount of time that we have, and really just get your initial thoughts on the big trend lines that you follow, the things that you are thinking about, you know, in this broad topic, and those that our audience members should also be thinking about. So Liz, over to you.
Thank you, Jackson. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I want to just say that the task force on the work of the future from MIT was launched just a couple of years ago in the context of this sense that the robots are coming and they're going to take all our jobs, and, you know, what are we going to do? And obviously things have changed dramatically in the era of COVID right now. Certainly. But I think the first thing to sort of level set in this conversation is that that we do not believe that technology is going to eliminate work in the future. It has really been a source of creation of work throughout history. And so I think the first point is to say our challenge will not be, certainly in the long term, about will there be enough work. There will certainly be enough work. The issue is really more the quality of that work and the accessibility of that work to to workers. There's no question that technology is not a independent, benign, factor. It has impacts. It has hollowed out a lot of our middle skill jobs, manufacturing, clerical work, and at the same time, it's creating a tremendous amount of new work. So the first point is, that's not our big challenge. Our challenge will be more about how do we support workers through transitions. The other point to make is that for all of the new and exciting things going on with AI and robotics, with data science, et cetera, these technologies are more evolutionary than revolutionary. Mm-hmm. And so while we're all seeing, the next the iPhone come out every 6 months, the fact is that these technologies take decades to diffuse into the economy. We're still seeing now the sort of full cycle. A lot of MIT folks think this takes out for about 40 years, but the cycles of the internet, the impact of the internet, of cloud computing, of mobile. And so here we are at the beginning of AI, really the introduction, and probably, people will say the first inning or the first 10 years of a 40-year cycle. And so all the hype, for example, around autonomous vehicles, we had thought we'd all be driving without drivers by 2020. Well, right now people are saying that's not in the near future, may not even be in the long-term future. And the same thing with grippers, for example, where the pick and pack warehousing, we thought, can the robots just come in and, well, actually we're not quite there with the grippers. And so it takes time, and that time gives us a chance to adapt and change our skill sets. If you are a medical transcriptionist, however, your job is probably, disappeared over the last decade, right? And so there is time, there's a lot of changes. These technologies often are augmenting the high-skilled worker and substituting for tasks for the low-skilled worker. So that's where I think we see important distinction and a need for making sure our institutions are focused on those who are most affected by this technology and trying to both increase skills and education as well as job quality.
Right.
Liz, right. we are saying the same thing at Intel. I'll tell you that as we have redefined our role to become a data company, a data-centric company, and have AI as one of the 4 pillars that we are, as a corporation, relying on for our extended growth, understanding the impact of artificial intelligence on the future of work is a very important thing, not only inside Intel, but to all the customers that we advise and provide mind share and thought leadership. And certainly, I agree with you in many ways. This idea of the destruction of jobs is a much easier thing to be able to do than think about some of the new jobs that are coming on board. At Intel, we are at the forefront of a transformation around shifting our workforce from a focus on roles to a focus on skills. And this shift is going to help us really redefine the way that the workers that work at our company help drive our growth and drive the way that we interact with our manufacturing, our end customers, and our partners. But for sure, the point that you made around human augmentation can't be understated. I think many people focus on this automation as a catalyst for changing jobs, but I would say that human augmentation is just as much a catalyst. And we're seeing little ripples of examples today, especially in the areas of AR and VR, virtual reality and augmented reality, especially in the gaming areas, where we can see an automatic extension in the very near future to how work gets done, how we are able to use digital twins to simulate processes, and how workers of the future will move to having thinking machines that operate at internet speed to help with some mundane tasks, maybe some very dangerous tasks, but we will be focusing on things that are uniquely human. And so in many ways, this idea of what is uniquely human is foundational to much of the work that we are thinking about when we think about the extended future of work.
One of the things, as I'm seeing, if I'm measuring the nodding, I saw most of the nodding happen around the idea of a unique human skill. Maybe you want to pick up on that thread. What is your thoughts when we're talking about the concept of augmenting human work and the concept of having AI bring out new jobs in the workforce? What are you thinking about when you're hearing Melvin talk about unique human skills?
Yeah, it's really exciting, actually. You know, I think we have a lot of fear about this technology for good reason. A lot of people have not seen benefits in their work, you know, in their lives to all of this productivity growth and innovation. You know, if you're the typical worker, your wages have been stagnant. But the fact is that one of the things that I think why the task force was originated was there was a lot of these reports a few years ago. Remember the whole 47.6% of all jobs will be automated away in 10 years. I mean, all this kind of really
scary headlines.
Scary headlines, and you know, you weren't kind of sure how people got to those numbers. One of the things that I think is Melvin's emphasizing here is we have to think about things in terms of tasks, not in terms of jobs. So a lot of this technology can substitute at the task level, and every job will be affected by that, right? And what we want to do is substitute for the tasks that are very routine and mundane and maybe dangerous and, you know, repetitive, and augment on the tasks that are building on human skill set. And if you look at the last 10 plus years and how the labor market, you know, what the labor market's looking for in terms of skills, what's really fascinating is to see that social skills have been as important, if not more important, than STEM related skills, right? Than technical skills. What we know is that the technical stuff, you know, somebody will absolutely be able to do the math quicker than I can. Doesn't even matter, 2 + 2, and they'll do it quicker than I can. But they can't necessarily use, you know, they can't engage with a customer or with a patient. They can't necessarily use judgment. They can't collaborate across different disciplines. And so all these human skills are actually, you know, really emphasized. And if you think about some where the growth has been, like in nurses or in social working or in a whole host of fields where you need an interpersonal piece of, you know, piece of the equation is the social and the emotional, then you see that there's really, I think, a way in which hopefully our technology can be used to, you know, augment, as Melvin was saying, and also, frankly, you know, COVID obviously is a critical time right now for our labor market. We're in a real crisis. But long term, the demographics are such that we will be needing more workers. You know, we'll have more jobs than we will have workers. We have a declining, you know, aging workforce. We have declining fertility rates, et cetera. And so this technology could be our friend and sort of help at some of the lower skilled, less interesting work and hopefully bring out the best of what humans have to offer.
Yeah,
Let's
Liz,
hope
I
that
agree with
AI
you.
won't be a panel moderator anytime soon, but I want to turn it to Melvin to talk about emotional intelligence as one of the things we'd spoken about previously. And I'd love if you could unpack for us kind of what you think about as a unique human skill and how does emotional intelligence play into that?
Yeah, I did want to reinforce some of the things that Liz said. She had some really great points that can't be lost. And one of those is that this idea of artificial intelligence and thinking machines, it can really be our friend. And I think we need to think about that in a very serious way, because today there's still a dominant discussion around ethical behavior and explainable AI and it being related to this idea of Skynet. And in fact, what we really want to do is really think more seriously about what the impact is to real human work. And so, you know, when we think about this idea of uniquely human, there are a number of points that are salient, probably need to be brought to this discussion. The first is the World Economic Forum has a study they do every 5 years that talks about what are the top 10 skills that are required in jobs. And the 2000 report talked about things like complex problem solving, technical skills, some at the lower end of the maybe 7, 8, 9, the social skills that Liz talked about. In the 2015 or 2020 study, what was interesting about that is that emotional intelligence and mindfulness came up to number 2 and number 3 in this discussion. And so, you know, the idea of emotional intelligence, being able to be in the present, empathy, and finding a way to be mindful is certainly a uniquely human skill that, you know, is very hard to code for, and that, you know, we want to emphasize in workers today, no matter what their jobs are. Now, what's interesting about the 2025 report from the World Economic Forum is the things that are shifting to the top are associated with resiliency, tolerance, and and flexibility, along with the human skills we would normally expect to see around creativity, originality, and initiative. And so what it suggests is that the future of work for the AI era is going to involve a resiliency based on this post-COVID environment, but also highlight in many very specific ways creativity and initiative that can only be had by humans and then be augmented by machines.
Mm-hmm. So one thing we also previously talked about is whether emotional intelligence kind of is a skill that can be developed or something that is you're born with. What do you think is the balance between those two things? I'm sure there's people watching this right now who have either thought about their own job being impacted by AI or jobs of those they oversee. So do you have any maybe words of wisdom or potential things that people in the workforce need to do to be thinking about incorporating resiliency, emotional intelligence, and these innately human skills within their career trajectories and within their ability to operate well in an economy driven by AI?
Yeah, I think humans in general have some element of emotional intelligence and mindfulness innately. But I think in order to master this skill and really be in a better position to understand its impact, and not only in work, but in your personal life, it is going to require some training. And I have probably every year for the last 3 years taken an emotional intelligence and mindful course. I've recommended it to my kid's school in his 5th and 6th grade class. I think what we'll see is that people are going to spend more time learning how to calm down and relax and be in the present. And that really will take some education and a little bit of training on people's part in order to develop that skill.
Yeah. Liz, you've brought up COVID several times, and as Melvin was saying about resiliency, I'm reminding myself that there are many times in the past many months I've had to calm down and had to really be mindful about practicing resiliency in new situations. Do you think that you've talked about other impacts of COVID? Do you think this particular part, the emotional intelligence and resiliency, is something that people can be practicing right now during the age of COVID? Is this maybe a secondary impact we could see as a lasting thing from this pandemic? That obviously is terrible, but potentially there's an opportunity here for people to practice these things.
Yeah, and actually I feel like it's people practicing, but it's firms, it's employers learning how to support workers in the moment of this, right? We're all learning this online, online, we're having a sort of trial by fire on online work, remote work, learning, education, etc. And there's a lot for us to learn. And I think that firms that are bringing in the best practices and sort of understanding how do we help both communicate and realize the possibilities and the limitations of this work. So right now, about 40% of Americans are working from home. And that will probably continue to some extent. They're predicting that everyone will work from 1 to 3 days after this from home. And so we have to ask ourselves first and foremost how to make the most out of that, and what's gained and what's lost, right? A lot of the interaction, creativity, and innovation often comes from interpersonal interactions. What does that mean for being online? And then we also have to ask ourselves, well, what does this mean for the 60% who are not working from home? And what is, the resiliency from COVID has been, a lot of the low wage workers have been hit very hard. How do we recover? How do we provide opportunities for those workers? And I do hope that we find a way as a society to shift from the sort of institutions and framework that we've had historically, which has, allowed a lot of people to kind of benefit from these moments, and a lot of people, fall behind, to supporting everyone and getting back and rebuilding collectively for sort of a unified approach to this. But certainly we know, I will say, in the science of learning, we know a lot more about how infants and toddlers learn than we know how adults learn. Okay, so right now what I know is that after 10 minutes, everybody kind of shuts down. You get kind of tired. So right now I should stop talking because people are exhausted. But this is what we're going to be learning: is how do we most effectively learn transition, become resilient, shift in the face of different softwares and the different technologies. These are the things that I think will hopefully be come out of the COVID experience for everyone.
Yeah, well, as someone who works in Washington, D.C., it certainly feels like the adults can be like infants at times. In our closing minutes, though,
I was going to say, Liz, your point about being able to understand how people learn is really important. When we think about the actual jobs of the future, there is one element that seems to be a consistent thread through the entire discussion, and that is we're going to have to raise the level and the baseline for data acumen across the board. This idea that everybody is going to have a certain measure of acumen and understanding how data works, how it's being used to solve problems, what its value is, how it sometimes can be misused. This is starting to become a baseline area of education for anyone who wants to work in the future. And then, of course, at Intel, we're starting to already think about the jobs of the future. So this idea that we can start identifying jobs today that don't exist, but will exist 5 years from now. So one of those jobs would be something like a biomimicry engineer or neuromorphic scientist. These are jobs that you don't find any recs for and in any job search. Most universities don't have a degree program for them, but in 5 years, they're going to be just as hot as cybersecurity analyst and data scientist is now. And so the question becomes, what are we doing as an organization to start preparing for these future jobs? So we're writing descriptions, developing draft curriculum that we're sharing with institutions of higher learning. We're creating micro courses and nano course capabilities for certificate programs that allow people to rapidly gain the skills and acumen, both in data and the application of data in biomimicry and neuromorphic computing, so that 5 years from now, we actually will have people who are able to do these jobs.
We have only about a minute left. And so I have one kind of closing question, and I apologize. It's a big question, but we have a lot of leaders who are watching here today who have taken time out of their day to join us. And so what is your 2 to 3 sentence kind of closing message to the leaders who have to be thinking about how AI will change their workplaces in the future? And since Liz, I started with you, we can go to you first again and for closing thoughts.
Well, I'm reminded of my colleague David Mendel's comment, which is the future of AI is the future of work, that it is integrated so completely in what we'll be doing that we do need to understand it better. But I think to Melvin's point, we can equip our workforce, we can equip our employees with the skills to use this technology and to benefit everyone, and including benefit society as a whole, and focus on problems that are ones that we need to solve. So I would suggest that people are understanding the technology, but not forgetting the people in the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that leaders have a special responsibility when it comes to the future of work. Everyone's going to be affected, but we would encourage leaders to develop an ambidextrous mindset. I know that many leaders today are so focused on the tactical that they are not able to focus on the strategic and innovative skills and allow the operational focus to atrophy their innovation skills. We encourage the development of ambidextrous leadership so they can focus on both of those simultaneously, so that they can drive future.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. And it's sad we have to cut it a little bit short here. There's still so many things we could talk about, but I want to thank our guests again. Liz Reynolds, the executive director of the MIT Task Force on the Work of the Future, and Melvin Greer, Chief Data Scientist for the Americas at Intel. Again, I'm Jackson Barnett, editorial fellow here at FedScoop, and I want to thank the audience for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the event. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today. I'm FedScoop Editor-in-Chief Billy Mitchell, and I'm joined now by Mike Brown, Director of the Defense Innovation Unit. Mike, thanks so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited, Mike, to talk to you a bit about the evolution of DIU. It's been several years since you guys were chartered and founded within the Defense Department, and you guys have done some really cool stuff. So I'd love to start there today by hearing about the evolution of DIU and kind of how it's expanded its mission over this past year.
Well, it's a great time to talk about that, Billy, because we just celebrated our 5th anniversary since then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter formed the Defense Innovation Unit. And of course, what he saw was that there is tremendous investment happening in the commercial sector in a lot of technologies that the military needs. We're talking about AI, cyber, autonomous systems. And in these areas, we need to make sure that the department has access to what's happening commercially and that we can scale that. Can we adopt that quickly? And that really is the mission of the Defense Innovation Unit. How can we accelerate adoption of commercial technology? So what we discovered pretty early on is that we needed to be more than a tech scouting function. We actually needed to do projects. So about 4 years ago, we started developing portfolios of technologies, some of which I just named: AI, cyber, commercial space. And we do projects in those fields that help test capabilities the commercial sectors develop in military applications. We're about to start our 100th project at DIU. We've transitioned about 25 different capabilities of technology that have been tested and are ready to be scaled at the department. We probably influence today about $1 billion of defense procurement, and we've introduced 65 first-time vendors to DoD. So we're pretty happy with the evolution, but we feel like we're just scratching the surface in terms of what could be done.
Very cool, and a very good context to start a conversation today. Mike, you mentioned AI, and obviously FedTalks is part of our AI week, our National AI Week. So I'd love to go in that direction and hear a little bit more about how you're supporting DoD's greater adoption of AI. Obviously, AI is a big topic for the DoD in recent years, particularly with the development of the Joint AI Center. But I'd love to hear what you guys are doing to support that development across the department.
Yeah, critically important technology, as Secretary Esper talked about, that being just very, very important to the military's overall capabilities. We actually started working some AI projects before the Joint AI Center was developed. And much like any project, it starts with an urgent need. So rather than thinking about the general case of how do we bring AI to the department, we start with specific needs that can be met using AI technology. So one that has been talked about often is, what can you tell from images that you might be able to apply machine learning to? So an early on project that was well known as Project Maven, we participated in developing the vendors for that. That was trying to understand, what am I looking at with those pixels? What can we do to have machines identify some of what we're looking at as opposed to having humans do that? So a different application of that we're working right now is predictive medicine. So radiologists in the commercial world are using machine learning to be able to help spot what might be the precancerous cells, so you can optimize the time of a radiologist. Another AI project that we worked on is predictive maintenance. So in the commercial sector, airlines are using predictive maintenance AI algorithms to tell them what parts might need to be changed sooner rather than later, so that we can keep this aircraft flying and in the air. And we're using that same commercial technology for everything that moves within DoD, starting with the Air Force, but really expanding this to look at the Marines, Army, so for ground-based vehicles, as well as naval aircraft. This may be the first DIU project that in fact spans all of the services. And we look for projects that really have applicability across all of DoD. That's one of the things that makes DIU unique, is we're a joint organization that's focused on commercial technology. So again, how we help bring AI into the department is looking for where those user needs are and then matching that up with the best technology that's available in the commercial sector. And then how can, through a project, we test that technology, make sure it works in the military application, and then scale that. And we're continuing to do that in partnership with the Joint AI Center. Very often we'll partner on a project where they will identify what the need is, and we'll look and see who are the best vendors to work with and do that project together.
Gotcha. So I'd love to kind of take a conversation towards that. You know, when you were founded, DIU was really thought of as that that bridge between the DoD and Silicon Valley. And I know in many ways you still perform that role, but I'd love to hear a bit about, because you have that inside knowledge, what the tone of that partnership's like. You mentioned Project Maven, which we won't get into specifics on it, but there was some issues with Google backing out of that, and it kind of it soured the relationship, and it didn't sour the relationship, but there was some connotations of that maybe Silicon Valley didn't want to work particularly with DoD. So I'd love to get your thoughts from the inside on how that relationship is and what the tone of that is today.
I'm pretty pleased with the tone. So I'm glad you brought up Project Maven, because that was a widely covered project and reaction by some employees. I think it's been pointed out that the number of employees who were protesting at Google was less than those who had ties to the military, either were veterans or had veterans in their families. And what we've seen is that is very much the exception rather than the rule. We find an increasing number of companies would be interested in doing business with the Defense Department if they're a way that we need to be showing to get them to a production contract. In other words, to make it worth their while. So we've seen an increasing number of companies respond to problems or solicitations that we send out. That's up on average 40% year over year. So DIU's track record is becoming more well known in the innovation hubs, where we're trying to attract attention around the country that not only includes Silicon Valley, but all of the innovation hubs. In fact, we've had solicitations from almost all 50 states, and about half, companies from about half the states have participated in DIU awards. So we're pleased with the overall level of enthusiasm. In fact, one of the last solicitations we did was companies that could help with swarms of drones. We call that artificial intelligence for small unit maneuvers. And we had a record 111 companies respond to that.
Oh, wow.
So we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm, and what we need to do at DIU is continue to make it attractive for those companies to respond. And the way we do that is make sure we don't waste their time. We get them to a yes or no answer quickly. If 111 companies respond, obviously the key benefit we can provide, since not all 111 are going to win a contract, is to let those companies know who are not going on to win a contract, let them know quickly, so that we reflect the value of their time. There's an opportunity cost involved for them to respond to DIU. So we want to make sure we quickly let them know what the answer is.
That's great. And I think it feeds directly into my next question, which is DIU's done a tremendous job in reaching non-traditional small companies outside of the Department of Defense's traditional contractor base. You know, obviously the intent would be to scale that emerging technology, but as we all know, there's this thing in the Department of Defense called the Valley of Death. And it's, we've heard a lot of people say that it's difficult for you know, the department to scale, you know, companies, whether they're small or large, past that Valley of Death once they get those initial innovation grants and whatnot, or small OTAs, things like that, to actually give them commercial production awards. So I'd love to hear, you know, what can DIU and others at the Department of Defense do to kind of eliminate or at least bridge that gap and help those small companies get to the other side?
Right. Well, the way we look at this, as while many folks use that term Valley of Death, there's several valleys of death.
Sure.
One of those valleys is where DIU is focused today, which is if you have a product, how can I get into the Department of Defense and start scaling that? So that Valley of Death we bridge by providing revenue contracts to early stage companies. They in turn use that to go raise more equity funding. And we've seen anywhere from a 10x to, in some cases, 100x multiplier for every dollar we provide in a prototype contract. their ability to go out and raise equity dollars that, of course, keeps the company funded for it to continue its development operation. So that's the principal way today DIU addresses one of those valleys. An earlier valley of death in terms of a company's development would be, how does it get started? So DIU typically has not played a role in that, but we've asked to play a role with a mechanism that we have proposed called National Security Innovation Capital, particularly relevant for hardware companies. There's a lot of dual-use hardware companies that are great ideas, but have difficulty attracting venture capital, which is moved almost exclusively to software these days. So for those areas, we proposed this fund that would be a catalyst for private money, just as we talked about DIU's prototype contracts help companies go raise equity capital. And that's been approved in the National Defense Authorization Act and in the House Appropriations bill, which is, of course, up for passage now in this term of Congress. $15 million has been appropriated for national security innovation capital. So that would be a way for us to stimulate vendors, the start for vendors that we'd love to see in something we call the National Security Innovation Base. Folks we can draw on to provide answers to these problems that the military has. And then one more valley of death would be kind of further on. Once a company has a successful prototype with DIU, sometimes there's an issue of how do we get that scaled within the department, and that often requires budget dollars from our DoD partner or customer to scale that solution. So we'd love to see more budget flexibility there. Innovation funds would be an answer, or just program offices having more flexibility in how they spend their dollars. That would bridge another valley of death for companies who would have an early win with us, but would like to get that scaled through the department.
That's great. Lots of valleys of death, unfortunately, but great to see you guys are doing some great work to help those companies out. Final question I had for you today, Mike. You know, there's DIU, but there's also other similar innovation type organizations within the DoD. And you just mentioned that Congress plays a key role, obviously in funding and setting authorizations for the things that you do. So I'd love to hear about that congressional role and how Congress oversees and measures the success of these organizations, because you know, it could be difficult to keep track and to measure which ones are kind of moving in the right direction. So that's an interesting ecosystem that I'd love to hear a bit about from you as we close out.
Sure. Well, as you point out, lots of innovation activities, which is goodness for the Department of Defense. The thing that distinguishes DIU would be we're joint, so we work across all the services. Some are service specific, like AFWorks. Mm-hmm. The other thing that makes us unique is we exclusively focus on commercial technology. You could almost think of us as the Defense Commercial Technology Unit. That would be an apt name for us. We work with those other innovation organizations like an AFWorks or NavalX. Sometimes we'll do projects together. We selected the vendor base for what's called Electric Vertical Takeoff and Landing that now has become an AFWorks Agility Prime project. So we try and work closely with those organizations. The JAIC is another one. We talked about that partnership earlier because there's more benefit by combining our efforts than by working in silos. So we're very aware of that. In terms of measurement, we've proposed a number of different measures to Congress for DIU. One, of course, would be transition capability. So of the projects we start, how many find their way into warfighters' hands? As I've said, we've done about 25 transition of capabilities, and we're increasing our transition rate. So the ability when a project starts for it to find its way into warfighters' hands by a number of internal improvements that we've made at DIU. And that rate is improved from 35% 2 years ago to now on its way close to 50%. So we're excited about that. Introducing new vendors to DoD. So as I talked about before, some 65 vendors we've introduced the department because we're using commercial technology. So we have a goal of saving 10 times our budget in terms of the dollars that we save. And speed. We're all about moving at commercial speed. So commercial companies find it easy to work with us. We can put a company onto a contract to solve a problem within 60 to 90 days of posting for that that solicitation, or when that we see the number of vendors who are interested, like that 111. That'll be a challenge to do that one in 60 to 90 days, but most often we're in that range. So those are some of the measures that we have for ourselves and that Congress uses to measure us.
Well, thanks for that. Mike, it's always great chatting with you, and it's great to catch up. So thanks so much for your insights today, and I look forward to the next time we can do it again.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Hello, we're excited to have you join us today for the Innovation in Healthcare session at FedTalks. I'm Dave Nazepper, and I'm a tech reporter at FedScoop. Joining me today are Dr. Carolyn Clancy, Assistant Undersecretary for Health for Discovery, Education, and Affiliate Networks at the Veterans Health Administration, and Dr. Ashvini Zanuz, Chief Medical Officer and SVP at Salesforce. Artificial intelligence innovation requires collaboration between agencies like VHA and industry, as well as access to quality data. The latter has been a decades-long struggle in the healthcare space. Agencies like VHA have had to get creative as they look to employ emerging technologies. On that note, Dr. Clancy, what can you tell us about the recently established AI Institute's role within VA and some of its early work?
So thank you, Dave. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. Let me say that the establishment of the Institute actually puts a marker down and says that the Department of Veterans Affairs hopes to be a prominent organization for research, development, and training of artificial intelligence with impact on a global scale, all focused on ensuring the health and well-being of our veterans. What this means, of course, is that this unique asset and its leader actually has to have collaboration across many of our program units, which is very, very important. And what they have started to do is to focus on policies, processes, partnerships, and pilots. So just to give you one example that's quite current, they have designed a framework whereby AI research and development can be integrated into some of our clinical modules. So at the DC VA, we're testing models for COVID-19 prognosis. Everyone would love to know. I mean, you hear about some people who say, oh yeah, I tested positive, but I'm feeling fine. And other people rapidly become quite ill, and some even die from the disease. Being able to know that ahead of time and anticipate that urgency would be really, really important. And a lot of this work comes about through tech sprints that involve a lot of people, a tool created by a nonprofit organization. And we were recently granted live production level VA access that actually lets us go about doing all this work.
Now, how does VA find good AI use cases? And Dr. Zanuz, maybe afterwards you can talk a little bit about how industry collaboration helps bring those to bear.
So we get use cases from all kinds of people, and we really have a veteran engagement board. So we get some use cases from veterans, we get some from physicians, researchers, and others at the medical centers, and we have about 170 of those medical centers. And the tech sprint brings together industry, academia around these use cases to build and demonstrate how AI tools built using VA data and expertise can actually be deployed to help veterans. To get there, we often need something called a CRADA. We have acronyms for everything, Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. So for example, we have a CRADA with Google, or a component of Google, which is actually focusing on trying to predict those people who get acute kidney injury early so that we can prevent further deterioration.
Dave, thank you so much for inviting me first and having me on. So glad to be here with Dr. Clancy. I came last from the VA, so it's really exciting to participate in this. I would say, you know, having first been in provider space and now coming to tech, I will tell you that I think if you're going to have really good innovation, it requires an ecosystem and a participation across various stakeholders. So that includes tech companies, like Dr. Clancy mentioned. and really good public-private partnerships, that work well together and have a trusted relationship and that protects patient data. I think from a tech perspective, no company, I think, can operate in a bubble. The one thing I would say that the pandemic has made painfully clear is that we're not only dependent and beholden to our internal employees, whether it's a health system or a company like a shareholder, but it's also the communities that we live in, and then the exchange of data, right? So when you're looking at COVID data, for example, working together with the rapidly accelerating technology, with data that's coming in and collaborating with the stakeholders and folks that are at the front lines delivering care, you're going to yield better results than if you're in a bubble. So I think if you can put your mission front and center, and in this case, it's veterans for Dr. Clancy, in general for provider systems and probably for payers, it's to put the patients at the center. As long as you have that concept and you're expanding your ecosystem to enable everybody to come in and participate and bring the best ideas to bear, I think we're going to be really, the most successful.
Now, how are government and industry working to make health data more actionable for AI, and what still needs to be done?
So one of the things is there are many, many efforts to make data more openly accessible where possible through APIs or application programming interfaces and in machine readable format, so it's much easier for AI to process. There are also ongoing efforts to map clinical text to clinical terminologies that can help AI process the information. And there's work to be done to integrate work into live data feeds and workflows so that AI is always getting real-time information and that the best information can be delivered to the point of care.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, I would say in general, if you think about the amount of data that we're dealing with, healthcare makes up about 30% or so of the global data store. But I think, to Dr. Clancy's point, we've only managed to use about 3% of that data because of all the other barriers. So I think we've got a lot of data to tap into and use. And if AI can, if you make it actionable, I think AI can add a lot of insights. But to our earlier point, I think we've talked about point number one, which is our lack of interoperability, where our data sits in silos and disparate systems. And I think we've got to continue to solve for that. There's been a lot of regulations that have come through recently that I think will continue to move the needle, but we've got to continue to solve for that as a barrier. And I would say the second biggest thing was what we just said, that oftentimes most of the data, I would probably say about 80% of the data comes in a format that's like unstructured data. And so it's really dark data that's difficult to utilize or analyze. So for that to become actionable, you've got to ensure that you take that data, put it in a format that's usable and that it's clean and it's valid, so you can actually provide solutions and clear insights.
Another challenge I wanted to touch on is, how do you balance the need for cloud-based infrastructure for AI innovation with the urgency of cybersecurity?
So what a great question, Dave. Thank you. We have really a multi-pronged strategy. First, our colleagues in IT are leveraging a VA cloud environment, particularly for our corporate data warehouse data. Our research partners are actually working with the University of Chicago to establish a VA data commons so that we could host de-identified data there outside the government cloud. This would be most relevant, again, for the clinical data in our data warehouse, but also linking that and being able to integrate it with data from our Million Veteran Program. We're not quite at 1 million yet, but approaching 900,000. So we're the only system where it's possible to actually be able to link genomic information with longitudinal clinical information. And then last but by no means least, we're actually working with the Department of Energy to leverage their high-speed computing capability. And again, that's very, very important for our work in taking the most advantage of our genomic data.
And I would say from an industry perspective, we're continuing to see rapid acceleration around this digital, transformation innovation. It's really important as that happens that we keep patient trust and our customers' trust that's critical and foundation of it all, right? So I think, as I mentioned earlier, with the CMS and ONC interoperability rules that are going into effect going into 2021, I think we see a lot of exciting conversations about patient privacy and access and ownership, et cetera, of the data. But I think from a tech company perspective, we also have to keep that in mind. And, our customer and patient trust has to be, I would say, our number one priority, especially when you're working with regulated industries like healthcare and life sciences and our public sector partners. So I would say tech companies in general, we look at how we partner with our customers to meet the government compliance and security standards like HIPAA and HITRUST, FedRAMP, Part 11, et cetera. There's so many more, but we ensure that we work together to make sure that we are compliant in those areas. And, we have to take responsibility and share the responsibility in protecting the patient data as we have access and work on these things on our platform. So as an industry, we're very aware and participating in these.
Now, another factor in all of this is as you get better data and as you get these AI tools, you still need the workforce that can really analyze that data and use those tools. What steps are VA and industry taking to train the AI workforce?
So we are setting up something called BD STEP for the Big Data Scientist Training Enhancement Program that will match trainees with VA medical centers all across the country to leverage VA data systems and hopefully to support clinically relevant year-long or more training and research opportunities in collaboration with some of our own researchers. This is still under construction, but I do want to emphasize that across the executive branch, for sure, there's a huge interest in figuring out how do we train this workforce. So your question's really important.
And I would say mostly it applies to industry as well. I think as the data flows and we're kind of seeing all these different types of data, there's a lot of collaboration with academia and with public sector healthcare, where we can look at that data, bring our data scientists, our researchers from the tech industry, and put them side by side with the researchers and work on this data. And I think at the end of the day, we are really inundated with a lot of data that's coming in from a lot of different sources. And I think from our perspective, we want to make sure that we're providing a single platform where we're only sort of bringing the data that's really important to the point of care. And that's the whole point of when we think about workflows and adding AI to the workflow, we want to really bring machine learning and other voice technologies, et cetera, in kind of reducing the burden and filtering out and surfacing the most useful and relevant data so that the people that are providing the care have it at the point of care. And I think that's the level of collaboration that we're looking for as we work with academia and and other public health government provider systems.
So we've talked a little bit about AI applications, but how is how AI is affecting healthcare currently? How does that differ from how it'll affect healthcare in the future? What's the future of this space look like?
Wow, so that's a great question. Right now, I would say the most visible, although invisible, aspect of AI in healthcare is showing up as decision support through electronic medical records, which is a very good thing. The clinician and patient don't see this, but they're getting better information at the point of care. One of my favorite projects that emerged from one of our tech sprints is actually trying to figure out how to make it really easy for patients to know about clinical trials. This sounds a little bit ridiculous, but if a patient comes in to see me, I may not know, even as I'm telling them that they have a new diagnosis of cancer or something like that, that they could be eligible for a clinical trial. If Amazon were running this, what we would see is, you'd get that information filtered and pushed to you, along with a list of the studies and how far they are from the individual veteran's home. We're not there yet, but that is the dream, right? So rather than needing to wait for the light bulb to go off in a clinician's brain, that information would just be put right in front of them. I think if there's one word that describes the future, it's going to be predictive. Being able to predict risk. Right now, we're testing a Bluetooth-enabled foot pad that diabetics can stand on. And because of subtle changes in the temperature at the bottom of their foot, we can identify which patients are at highest risk of amputation and bring them in early. I mean, this is mind-blowing. So we're preventing a lot of people from needing amputations, which in terms of quality of life, I think speaks for itself, but also saves a lot of resources and so forth. But that's only the beginning. I think we'll look back at that, which seems kind of cool now, and say, wow, that was really kind of primitive, because now we're doing so much more that's predictive.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, we have practical AI that's coming out, which is so exciting, especially for me as a radiologist. I will tell you there's so much being done with imaging that is transformative. When I started practicing medicine, we were still hanging up films, and when we had a cancer diagnosis and there was tumor measurements, we did that by hand. We, put up images side by side for comparison. Obviously from then to today, not only have we digitized everything, but there are algorithms in place, and it's really automating the speed and accuracy, I would say, of identifying all kinds of abnormalities, like brain hemorrhage or fractures, breast masses, and then this is just continually improving. It's not removing the radiologist, it's really adding and improving our workflows and our efficiency so that we can add more and more value. And so as a radiologist, I'm really excited because I see it live, and I think that's really incredible. I would also say, as a technology leader, I see a lot of day-to-day stuff that's been coming out and tackling our administrative really are crippling administrative burdens. I don't have to tell anybody on this meeting that administrative costs, account for a significant portion, a quarter or more of our healthcare expenditures. So I think, there's so much now coming out with AI where they are really automating the process, using robotic process automation to remove a lot of the repetitive tasks. And I think that's really, really exciting and impactful, right, to the healthcare system. Future, I think the future is so bright with AI. I hope we continue on this path, and I think we will. I think Carolyn mentioned some of it around clinical trials and personalized medicine. I would say, on the life sciences side, there's going to be acceleration and additions into using real world data and real world evidence into drug discovery and into developing personalized treatments. And I think at the end of the day, also for clinical performance, we talked about this a little bit, today we have some basic clinical decision support, but I think this is going to build, and you're going to have credible, accurate data at the point of care, so you can actually, have better performance. And I think all of these things are exciting and makes the future bright for healthcare, and I'm excited about it.
Well, on that optimistic note, I think we're out of time, but thank you both again for joining us today and for your insights. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the rest of FedTalks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
One reason so many leading technology companies keep coming back to Scoop News Group is the creative work we produce and distribute through our content studio. This year alone, our S&G Content Studio has created and delivered work for more than 50 clients to help them stand out and inform today's top public sector decision makers. Hi, I'm Wyatt Cash, Senior Vice President at Scoop News Group. Our team of market experts, award-winning journalists, and designers can provide your business development teams with a full array of customized, high-impact videos, podcasts, special reports, and disruptive research studies, and more. Let's talk and let us show you how we are helping the world's leading tech companies deliver their messaging with greater impact.
Hello, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Katie Olson, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Defense Digital Service. DDS is a SWAT team of nerds in the Department of Defense using technology to bolster our national defense. I'm delighted to be part of FedTalks this year in its 11th year to share how DDS is transforming and modernizing government, hacking bureaucracy, shifting culture, and saving lives. DDS is a team of highly technical nerds, designers, product managers, engineers, and data scientists. We're from industry and we're from government. We anchor our work in 5 principles. 1, go where the work is. 2, do work that matters. 3, be brave and tell the truth. 4, ask for forgiveness, not permission. And 5, design with users, not for them. DDS is doing things like running bug bounties to find vulnerabilities and better secure defense systems. This includes our Hack the Pentagon program, which was launched in 2016 and was the first federal bug bounty program. We have teamed up with all of the services at this point to launch similar bug bounty programs. At this year's virtual DEF CON 28, one of the largest hacking conventions in the world, we partnered with the Air Force to launch a Hack a Satellite challenge, which allowed hackers to surface vulnerabilities in a satellite, helping to secure a relied upon and important communication asset. And we did it all virtually with very little time to prepare. In March 2020, we went into lockdown, and like much of the world, we had to adapt to working remotely. While we already had the tools and resources to work from home, and DDS is a fairly distributed workforce with locations at the Pentagon, in Augusta, Georgia, and in Mountain View, California, we have the ability to move projects somewhat seamlessly, but our counterparts in Washington Headquarters Services, which oversees Pentagon employee onboarding, did not necessarily have the same setup. So DDS helped WHS to apply technology and to acquire equipment to continue to hire and onboard employees throughout the pandemic. Since March, DDS has successfully onboarded over 30 of our own employees and over 1,000 employees for the department entirely virtually. The pandemic has changed the way that we think about technology, remote work, and the virtual environment. Talent and recruitment are key for DDS. The DoD can't leverage or hire talent that we need fast enough. At DDS, we've been modeling what faster and more diverse hiring looks like, going to places where technologists live and work to try and recruit them to our important mission. DDS takes people on to do 2-year tours of duty, and we want to encourage people to take advantage of that model to come and do something good for their country for a few years. Being able to respond rapidly during the pandemic changed the way of hiring, and to continue hiring has been a big win, both for DDS and for the department at large. The pandemic has pushed even the upper limits of what DDS is able to do in terms of rapid deployment of technology and critical services. We have executed leapfrogs and brought in incredible talent. We have learned at DDS that we can move quickly and at scale. A couple examples of that work specifically during the pandemic. So one example is DDS support for the Navy, beginning with the USS Theodore Roosevelt, which in early March found itself paralyzed on the coast of Guam with an aggressively increasing COVID-19 infection rate. In the middle of the night, our director received a phone call The virus had been detected on the ship, and the governor of Guam did not want sailors to exit the ship. Thousands of lives were at risk for COVID-19 infection, and the Navy at large feared that the situation could replicate itself at ships that were active at sea throughout the Pacific. As a matter of national security, the crew needed to know who had the virus very quickly in order to take action. Within 48 hours of answering the call, DDS stood up a tool to do just that. We now have implemented an app to track the virus across 17 different naval locations. Tech talent is at the heart of what DDS does. We are constantly looking to include talent from the public and private sector. This is a priority, to hire the best tech talent in the world from government, from industry, and from the private sector. We are modernizing government technology and government culture, transforming how government uses technology, solving mission-critical problems, and breaking the status quo. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are also taking center stage in our technical approach. The Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, or the JAIC, was established in 2018 by the Department of Defense to accelerate the delivery and adoption of AI in order to achieve mission impact at scale. And they have pursued several national mission initiatives. For the DoD, AI can build intelligent programs and machines that can leverage large and complex problems spanning the services. The foundation of a successful AI program should include a platform with shared data and reusable tools and services that can empower anyone to rapidly build and deliver AI capabilities. Such a platform for AI in the department could leverage the data and insights generated from DDS projects. For example, our counter UAS program or unmanned aerial surveillance systems, and the work we did for the Navy for COVID-19. Pairing what DDS and other DoD organizations are seeing in the field with a platform for AI and ML could be a game changer, putting us ahead of our adversaries. There is much for us all to learn in the landscape of technology and government innovation. I look forward to sharing more about DDS and the work that we'll do with AI and ensuring that technology remains at the forefront of national defense and an influence on government at large. Thank you again for having me. I appreciate everyone's time and look forward to hearing from the other speakers as part of FedTalks.
Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in today to our panel on turning experience data into action. I'm Billy Mitchell, Editor-in-Chief of FedScoop, and joining me is Chelsea Bright, Global Industry Leader for Qualtrics. Chelsea, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Billy. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk about experience management in the government space. I think I'd like to start today's conversation with sort of a high-level view on the state of citizen, customer, you name it, experience management. There's a lot of different twists on experience management, experience management in the government space. So I'd love to start by maybe you could point us in some places where things are maybe going well, and maybe some places that can improve. Just give us a rundown of what things look like at the government level.
Yeah, great question, Billy. I think it's been pretty interesting over the past several years. We've seen experience management really take off in the public sector space in a new way. It's been around in the private sector world for quite a while, and a number of government agencies really globally are now looking and trying to understand how they can take some of the best practices that have been developed in the private sector world and apply those in a government setting. And to your point, when we think about experience data, really thinking about how do we collect and use feedback from all of the stakeholders that we work with in the government space, whether that's our employees, customers that might be other agencies or organizations that we serve, citizens, residents, members of the public, and really, thinking about those data points and the feedback that we're collecting from them and how we're going to be able to use that to continue to improve service delivery, the programs and policies that we're providing, and ultimately knowing that all of that work is impacting the relationship that we have with those stakeholders and the trust that they have in us. And so, as organizations are doing this, we've seen some really incredible innovators, across the spectrum doing some phenomenal work. I've been very encouraged in the last year. The Office of Management and Budget, for example, has stood up a CX practice, and they're even thinking about how you connect both customer experience and employee experience together, and providing some really great guidelines for federal agencies to use in developing out those practices. We've seen some encouraging work with US Census, where they are, taking this quite literally and collecting feedback from Americans nationally and using that data to help understand people's sentiment around the pandemic that's going on right now, as well as how it's impacted people's mental health and their economics, and then using that feedback to kind of help inform federal agencies and responses. At the local level, we've got, a number of great cities that are using feedback to improve service delivery. And they are also using that to help prioritize like where we could do more with digital services and streamline government processes and operations. City of Orlando is an organization that has done some really phenomenal work in standing up their customer experience program, and then now an employee experience program, and connecting those together. And globally, we've seen some really fantastic examples. In Australia, it's become like a regular practice to have a minister of customer experience, right? So we've had the chance to work with New South Wales, a state there, and to help them build out that customer experience program as well. So I've been really encouraged just across the board, and feel fortunate to work with all the cabinet level federal agencies in some capacity, and over 350 state and local agencies as well.
Really cool. It's really cool to see it kind of pop up and grow to a new level of importance across the world, really, but especially here at home. One thing, we talk a lot about the citizen or the customer experience, but also there's the employee experience that's very important across the federal government. We hear about the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. It's a very powerful tool to sort of measure how employees are satisfied in their jobs and how engaged they are. So I'd be curious to hear, using this same sort of data, how can agencies better manage and measure this employee experience, and how does it sort of intersect with those same things we were just talking about, the customer and the citizen experience?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up FEDS, which I think is a pretty common example. Certainly at the federal level, people would be familiar with that, which is typically done as a annual survey. Things have been a little bit different this year, where you kind of go out and do this one-time push to collect all of that data, and you compile it, do the analysis, and like 6 months later, you get a report. And that's pretty typical, even at say state and local level, where we see that as a process. And one of the challenges that has really come to light this past year with the pandemic, with that type of a process, is that it's really hard to be agile and responsive to employee needs when you only have one point in time that's collected once a year. And you just can't be as actionable as you need to be to meet some of the employee needs. And we saw that this year as agencies move to a work remote environment in many cases, have now started in some cases to kind of move back to on-person. Sometimes it's a hybrid mode. And it's, I think for a lot of employees, and myself included, has been kind of a disruptive year in terms of our typical workflows. And so we've seen that it becomes really important to have more frequent engagement with your employees and asking them for their feedback, and then using that to help prioritize and make decisions and kind of adjust your policies. And we've seen some really encouraging results with this. One of the agencies at the federal level that we partner with, they took this to heart and really had started like pulsing their employees, where they're regularly asking for feedback, and have seen some very impressive response rates, where within like 3 hours of sending out a brief short feedback survey to their employees, saw like over 30% respond and give that feedback, so that they could use that to help inform decisions. And I think for a number of agencies, they've found some really interesting insights there, where things and topics have surfaced that they didn't realize were concerns of their employees. Even small things, on the supplies and equipment that people have or don't have and need to be effective in truly driving some of those outcomes for the programs that they serve, have been important insights that have come up. And because the employee experience is so critical to delivering good customer experience and the types of services that we provide to members of the public, it really does become important to make sure that our employee needs are met, that they feel empowered, that they're engaged in part of the solution to many of the problems and challenges that we're dealing with right now.
So what role does technology play in all of this? Obviously, I think technology can be a driver for these services and optimizing them, but I'd love to hear your take on, it's almost 2021, and obviously technology has become such a big thing in this past year as we've all become less in person, more remote. So how is technology a driver for optimizing citizen services?
Yeah, I think especially this year with the pandemic and not being able to provide as many services in person, we've seen, this really acceleration and adoption of technology across governments, which has been very encouraging to see how fast so many organizations have innovated. A couple of areas that we've seen tremendous growth are really thinking through how can you automate and digitize a lot of the processes that may have been manual historically. And we've seen agencies even going and advocating for like legislative changes to make it easier to provide those services digitally. And if we think about the world that our stakeholders live in, it's a very digital world. You think about companies like Amazon that have completely transformed the way we shop online, and you can go and put something in your cart, and 2 hours later it'll show up on your doorstep. And those expectations that customers have also bleed over into the public sector, where they're coming to government agencies expecting more of those. And so I think as we think about this year and then even looking into the future, we're going to see more of a focus on providing services digitally and automating a lot of those manual processes so that we're leveraging technology to do a lot of this, workflow modernization and kind of connecting of different data systems together so that that's a seamless experience. And the really key thing here with all of this modernization is that we have to do that with the user perspective first and foremost, like really thinking about who is that end user that is engaging with us on these services, and how are we understanding their needs and optimizing this, not so that it meets kind of like a compliance-based or regulatory-based perspective, which is important, but how is it going to be for them to engage on it? And I think that becomes so important because it's not just a matter of taking old processes and digitizing those exact same old processes, but really kind of giving us a chance to think about the process end to end and reinvent it and drive some really impressive innovation.
Very cool, very cool. So, our conversation today, I think that the heart of a lot of it is the data piece. Data is so important. So I'd love to kind of turn to that now, and how agencies should think about gathering data so that it's actionable, and then, making sure that that there's actionable decision making that comes from what they're doing, because I think a lot of times they're not preparing in that way. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, when agents take to experience management and think about managing citizen and customer experience, how should they be thinking about the way they're gathering data so that on the back end they're making quick and actionable iterative decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Billy. It's so critical. I think oftentimes when we think about collecting data, it's in the context of compiling a report or having dashboards, and that's an important first step to have that. But ultimately, if we're not taking action on the data that we're collecting from our stakeholders, if that data is just going into a black box, in many ways it does more to harm the relationship, and it kind of can decrease trust than build that up. So it really is important not only that we're taking action on it, but our stakeholders see the action that we're taking. We're being transparent and have that. You think about kind of the pulse survey that's happening with government agencies now, kind of checking in more frequently on their employees, especially if they're working from home. If you have a percentage of employees that have identified a pain point, maybe around connecting with like a VPN or something, and we don't do anything, take any action on that, that kind of further deteriorates morale, and employees are less likely to try to provide feedback next time. And that same thing is true for our external stakeholders and residents and citizens, that when they see organizations taking action on the data and the feedback that they've provided, that's really powerful. I think oftentimes stakeholders have pretty low expectations across the board of governments, and they kind of expect almost that their feedback goes into a black box. And it's been really phenomenal to read comments that our customers, governments across and around the world, have provided back around what residents say when they actually provide that opportunity to provide feedback, but then also take action on it. And people are like so amazed when governments actually do that. And I think it really kind of fully closes the loop. And as we think about what that looks like moving into the future, I think it's having that full loop and that process in place where we're agile and nimble enough to take feedback, adapt our processes, take action on that, and continue to evolve the government services and programs that we have to kind of meet those end needs more holistically.
That's great. And I imagine, there's this current explosion of chief data officers within the federal government. So that'll be an important thing that they're going to want to keep an eye on as this moves forward. Chelsea, we have time, I think, for one last question. Speaking of CDOs, another role that I'm hearing a lot about in that C-level tier of government is a CXO, a Chief Experience Officer. We haven't seen a lot of them, but we've seen some, and we've heard some people, some stirrings maybe within the White House and OMB about maybe pushing in this direction a little bit more. So I'd love to get your thoughts on whether you think this is a good direction for, the federal government to take, and if it were one where we started to see, not only CIOs, CTOs, CDOs, but a CXO at every agency, what might you suggest they should emphasize and focus on as these roles pop up?
Yeah, it's been very encouraging to see this role start to formalize. And it's a question that we get a lot in terms of where this role sits. How important is this role? And to your point, I do think that it's critical that there's somebody that owns this work. This is hard to do, right? The idea that we're going to use feedback from stakeholders to drive organizational change and be incorporated into change management is a really big undertaking, because it requires so much focus at the agency level in terms of our business processes internally. And so as we think about that role, it's really having someone that's a champion for this work that can drive that cross-functionally across the organization, can get people on board. That's a big part of this, is just breaking down those silos where oftentimes we may be collecting some feedback or stakeholder experience, but we're not looking at that holistically across the organization. So that is a key function of this role, or even if it's not a formalized role, having someone that really owns and is responsible for collecting that customer feedback and really thinking about it. Another key thing there is standardizing across the board. So often we may be asking questions or some feedback, even a customer satisfaction question can be asked 50 different ways, probably more than that. So someone that can standardize that across the different services so that we're getting that holistic customer journey view and really thinking about the end-to-end experience for our users and how do we optimize that. And without that kind of central leadership, C-suite role, thinking across all of the different organizational structures that our customers come into contact, we often miss some of the pain points and gaps that customers are experiencing, because in our world and potentially the program that we're providing, we don't see those gaps in the same extent. So I think like that elevated role can have a huge difference. And then I would say, having a close partnership with the IT department, really, this is both a marriage of a partnership between developing a program and an organizational process inside. It's also about having the technology component to scale these programs. We cannot collect feedback at scale, whether from our employees or our external customers, without leveraging technology and meeting people where they are via text message, emails, kind of having that omni-channel, collecting feedback on social media. That becomes really important. So we've got to leverage technology to do it. And so that requires a really close partnership with a chief data officer or the CIO as well.
I think this is going to be an area that is going to be very important in the coming years. And I'm glad we were able to have this conversation today, because I think it's important amongst the many conversations we're having this week at FedTalks. So Chelsea, I want to take the time to thank you for your insights today. It was a tremendous conversation, and I look forward to continuing it in the future.
Likewise, Billy, thank you so much for having me.
Hi, my name is Sean Lingus. I am a senior reporter at FedScoop, and welcome to FedTalks. I'm joined today by Martin Stanley, who is Chief of the Strategic Technology Branch at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the Department of Homeland Security. Martin, thanks so much for making time for us.
Thanks for having me out, Sean.
Great, so let's dive right in. We have a lot to cover. I want to talk about artificial intelligence and how it's used at your agency. There's a lot of hype and speculation about what AI can and cannot do. So we want to get some real world examples from you. I want to start by asking you, Martin, a little bit about how you measure the trade-off between using artificial intelligence, machine learning products, technology, versus a human analyst. At what point does it become favorable to use the technology, and at what point is it better to rely on a human to sift through data?
So that's a really great place to start. It's actually the place that we started when we were looking at artificial intelligence as a strategic technology within CISA, was to identify the criteria that we wanted to employ when determining whether we should automate something or not. And what we want to do is put some tools in the hands of program managers, folks that were not necessarily, AI specialists, that they could use in order to determine whether a particular use case was appropriate. And in our case, what we determined was, your typical benefit, regret kind of scale. You want something that's high impact, but if it doesn't work, it does not leave you with something that you regret, a condition that you regret. So we want things that have a good payoff. And then also within that, we're looking for processes that are understandable and don't have a lot of unpredictability about them. And I think that gets to really what the strengths and the weaknesses are between, machines and people. And that's what we're talking about ultimately, is creating a human machine team, within one of our mission spaces where we have just humans today. And so what that means is you want to take the advantage of humans, which are, dealing with intuition, dealing with, use cases where there may not be many previous examples, things that require, all of that thought and reasoning. We want to make sure that they can spend their time working on those particular cases, and then take the cases where you have a lot of examples, where you're able to train a machine, where how those things fail, how it's easily measurable. And I think the final point that I would bring, to folks' attention when they're thinking about this is, you need to know if you're being successful or not. And to me, that means you've got to have a human performance measure for the task that you're automating. Because if you don't, then you've got no idea whether it's accuracy or speed, how well the machine's actually working. And in many things that we do, we don't have those measures. So it's important to think about that up front, so you know that you're being successful, because you've got to know how well the machines do, in order to determine whether it's not working right.
Right. Absolutely. Those are great points. And I wanted to go back to something that CISA released earlier this year. It is a strategic roadmap implementation plan, I believe. In any case, it's the kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of AI. And government documents like this are often, can be dense, can be very detailed and policy oriented and wonky. But with something like AI, I think it's really important to get that out in the public eye and to set expectations. So walk me through a little bit about the importance of that plan and how it's being put to use.
Sure. So, formalization of CISA as an agency, elevated the CTO position, to a director level report. And, within that, what we've done is we've actually done a systematic view across the agency of the programs in the mission spaces to determine what are our technology gaps, what are our capability gaps related to delivering the mission and meeting the mission. And mission is foremost. Capabilities that support the mission, are right underneath, the mission. And then there's the technology, and there can be multiple technology options. So I think, it's important, and I appreciate we're having this conversation, because it's important that we don't start with technology first and just say, yes, we want to be, deploying this particular technology because it seems like a great thing. It's got to have a specific, connection to a capability gap that we're experiencing, as far as meeting our mission goes. And so what happened was, as a result of all this work that we've been doing, we were able to release what's called the Strategic Technology Roadmap Overview. It's available at the CISA site, and it talks about, the particular capability demand areas that CISA has, going forward for strategic technology. I encourage folks to take a look at it. But, preview as with respect to cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, is it highlights the things that we're focused on, which is analytics, security orchestration, automated response. None of these things should be surprising things probably that you cover every day. And of course, capabilities to support our threat hunting and, incident response mission. So, we're looking for particular capabilities that have AI components to them, but are really focused on improving our ability to meet mission.
Right, exactly. And you mentioned threat hunting and sort of malware analysis. That's the kind of thing that we write a lot about in terms of what CISA does. So how are you looking to apply some of those artificial intelligence tools to that mission? I know we talk about the strategic plan. It coincided with Brian Ware coming on board as the Assistant Director for Cybersecurity, and he has a background in AI. And one of his first public remarks, he mentioned the need to get some of those tools in the hands of analysts. So let's go a little bit deeper on what's going on there at the agency.
So first and foremost, I think our number one need and our number one focus is around analytics, and that's making sense of all this data that we have. We've got, if you've ever heard Christopher Krebs, our director, talk about the this unique view that CISA has with all of our stakeholders. We have all this information that we get from all of our stakeholders about different kinds of threats and campaigns and posture and all of that. And we want to make the best use of that data and be able to respond quickly and effectively, because what we're really talking about is rapid threat detection and then quick response. And that whole dynamic is changing based on autonomous systems. And so I think the question was, how are we best making use of this? And it's analytics first. And what I always say when we talk about analytics, because I think people can rightly express concerns, first and foremost in all our considerations are explainable AI systems. There's large efforts government-wide that we participate in, to have the best availability to advancements in explainable AI, because we've got to be able to communicate how machines are working and what they're doing, but also tying in with the federal data strategy, we have to make sure that we're able to demonstrate that we're using the data for the purpose that it was intended to be collected in the first place. And I know that folks will have those concerns, but I just want to I'll always reiterate that that's on our mind, and that we're putting in place controls, we're putting in place approaches and things like that within these environments that we're creating. And that's where a lot of the process stuff and a lot of the focus that we have is, okay, we're going to build these environments, but we want to have processes for building automation that builds in all that governance.
Yep, and you make a good point there, Martin. And you mentioned the word stakeholders, and it's an important word. Private enterprises have customers. CISA has stakeholders, which is some of the critical infrastructure companies in various sectors, financial, energy, telecommunications, that are kind of keeping the country running. And what are some of the feedback you're getting from some of those companies, some of those critical infrastructure organizations on your use of AI? It's a give and take, I'm sure, but you have to be responsive to those stakeholders, as you say.
Right. So ideally, it wouldn't be visible to our stakeholders, and I think we have so many stakeholders, as you talked about, that they might not even know who they are, because there's just, we support so much critical infrastructure. Our job is the nation's risk advisor. Ideally, these capabilities that we're providing are able to go as far as we possibly can with the appropriated dollars that we have. And so I would hope that what our stakeholders would see would be greater availability of services from us as a result of us being smart about automating the things that are best automated, and maybe not ever even visible.
Right, exactly. And it's on the one hand, there's people like yourself and CISA who are going ahead with this AI strategy, and on the other, there's also an active effort, irrespective of the political timing of anything, to recruit career officials in CISA who are good analysts, who know cybersecurity. So those things are not contradictory; they are complementary. So can you talk a little bit about how you see that? I imagine there's going to be a new sort of pipeline of young analysts coming into CISA in the coming years. How will they be joining a changing agency, given all we've talked about with artificial intelligence and other tools?
Well, so first of all, I would say to anyone that's listening, CISA is a great place to work. Fantastic mission. We enjoy broad bipartisan support for our mission and the stuff that we're doing. And I know you all report on that. Awesome place to work. great mission. You can make a difference working here. We're going to have to attract more diverse talent. And I don't necessarily mean tradition, in the traditional sense of diversity, which we're certainly focusing on doing that. But we have to have diverse skill sets. We have to have folks from different areas, because we're going to be building these, hybrid human machine teams that are going to incorporate a lot of new skill sets that will have our folks that have cybersecurity and mission expertise, but they need to be complemented by folks that are going to be able to, help us manage data. Who are going to be able to help us, to build analytics, to build the governance around them, to supervise machines, to be able to, determine whether they're performing well, to, produce, report, to understand capabilities that we have in place and what they're doing. We do a lot of that today. We certainly, have a very robust privacy program, but we're going to have to do the same thing for these kinds of capabilities as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I want to go back to something we touched on.
Workforce, I was going to say, workforce is a huge focus at the federal level, from the AI executive order, and, certainly from cyber, we've been working on this for years. All kinds of programs and all kinds of efforts for workforce.
Yeah, it's a really big part of the discussion. And we mentioned a little bit earlier on the trade-off between humans and analysts, or I'm sorry, humans and artificial intelligence. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more specifically, Martin, about, are there certain tasks that within the data sets that are much easier to automate? Are there certain tasks in terms of analysis and what people are looking at, are there easier to automate than others? I imagine the answer is yes, but feel free to enlighten us.
Sure. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit before. The idea that when you have lots and lots of examples, right? Those are really the kinds of use cases that are set up for the deep learning methods and approaches that are available, because you've got enough data that you can train the system on, and also there's other approaches where you're creating synthetic data to train machines where there isn't enough data available to train machines. But those are the cases, those are the use cases that we've got to apply and look at closely whether or not it makes sense to apply artificial intelligence to. The cases where we don't have lots of examples, where they just don't lend themselves to deep learning, those are the kinds of things that we to have our personnel available to focus on those things.
Yes, great point. And it's been an interesting year, to say the least. We've had the pandemic, which has disrupted everything, and I know your agency has shifted to remote working for several months. I'm wondering if that at all changes the equation of how you look at a lot of these things. I mean, we're certainly likely several months from returning to what resembles normal life. Is that ushering in more demand for the use of machines and artificial intelligence, or is it not really made much of an appreciable difference in terms of how you look at things?
Well, I think what it's ushered a demand for, what it's really brought to light, is IT modernization. There's probably some folks about this, previously. I think what we're seeing is, a need for organizations to be agile, to be able to modernize their infrastructure. And when they do it, they obviously have to do it in a secure way, so they continue to be able to, do the business that they're doing, but they're able to modernize and leverage new capabilities. CIS has been promoting that, over, throughout the pandemic, in addition to responding, under, our support for FEMA, Emergency Support Function 14, the supply chain, piece of this. We've been issuing guidance updates to the TIC, Trusted Internet Connection, things around remote workforce, all of the teleworking agreement and that kind of stuff. In addition to updating the TIC architecture to support zero trust and VPNs and some other things that folks are using, like VDIs. Those are all available on our website too for folks. And it's been pretty pretty well. But that stuff is just great.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your time, Martin. I really appreciate you chatting with us. And to our viewers, please enjoy the rest of Fed Talks.
Thanks, John.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Fed Talks fireside chat on modernizing Congress. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm FedScoop Editor-in-Chief Billy Mitchell, and it's my delight to chat today with Congressman Derek Kilmer of Washington. Derek Kilmer is the chair of the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. Congressman Kilmer, thanks so much for joining us today. Welcome to the program.
You bet. Great to be with you.
Absolutely. So I'm very excited to talk about this very loaded and expansive topic about Congress's involvement of technology, the modernization of Congress. I know you guys just came out with your final report a few years in the making. So I'd love to start our conversation today by diving into that final report from the Select Committee and hearing about, what your committee found and it is needed to modernize Congress. And, I think our audience today might be particularly interested in, modernizing House technology, but also just kind of throw it all out there. What did you find that was important over these few years in kind of diving into this space?
Yeah, maybe let me start off for folks who haven't followed this closely with what the committee was. Every few decades or so, Congress recognize that things aren't working the way they ought to, and they create a committee to try to do something about it. And this year's committee, as you mentioned, is called the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. And it was sort of nicknamed the Fix Congress Committee. And the committee was set up as part of the House Rules package in early 2019. And it was truly bipartisan. 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans. We were originally given just 1 year to do our work, but then we actually got extended through the end of the 116th. And you mentioned we've come out with a final report. We really worked together across party lines with an eye towards producing real results. We ended up passing nearly 100 bipartisan recommendations, all under the broad umbrella of just trying to make Congress work better for the American people. Doing anything that bipartisan can be hard in this environment, particularly in the midst of a rather tumultuous year that included impeachment, COVID, and some other hurdles along the way. I will mention also, we're a committee that, like past versions of this, doesn't have legislative authority. We make recommendations, but we've actually already turned around about 30 of our recommendations into legislation, which passed the House back in March. And we plan to do the same with our remaining recommendations. Our mandate, as you mentioned, was pretty broad. We were generally tasked with trying to make Congress work better. And one of the big areas of opportunity was House technology and trying to modernize and revitalize House technology. We made a lot of great recommendations in this space. I would say I think there's more work to do, and I would invite people to check out our report. Where our website's just modernizecongress.house.gov. Technology is a big area of opportunity. One of my colleagues said Congress is an 18th century institution using 20th century technology to solve 21st century problems, and I think that's largely true. We've seen technology evolve very quickly, and Congress falls behind very quickly too. And we heard about that from a lot of our colleagues and from a lot of the staff about how to make the House more just tech proficient. Maybe I'll dive into some specifics, and I will tell you, I know this gets rather inside baseball very quickly.
Love inside baseball.
But I think your listenership may be unique in having an interest in this. So some of our proposals were oriented toward reforming the House Information Resources, which oversees technology in the House, making sure that there's a streamlined approval process for outside technology vendors so that Congress can take on new technologies quicker, enabling member offices to beta test new technologies. We had recommendations around providing technologies to improve
engagement with our constituents. You know, so much of the discussion around House communications was based on a franking system that involved snail mail, and we know that there's new realities in the year 2020 and beyond. I mentioned some of it was oriented towards the House information resources, and we've made some proposed reforms, specifically, you know, ensuring that there's a single point of contact between House offices and HIR, providing some means of member feedback regarding outside vendors and HIR services, almost sort of Yelpifying the work that HIR does. We've proposed establishing a Congressional Digital Services Task Force to, you know, kind of examine the need for and the role of a specialized group of technologists and designers and others to support not just the House internal operations, but also some of the public-facing operations as well. And then we also proposed making permanent the Bulk Data Task Force and renaming it the Congressional Data Task Force. You know, that was established initially with a focus on the question of determining whether Congress should make the data behind Thomas and the LIS available to the public as structured data. You know, and the task force completed its initial mission, and in doing so, actually brought together many of the technology stakeholders inside the legislative branch, as well as members of civil society. And, you know, and they continue to hold public meetings and have forged a really productive working relationship. And so we thought there was value in making that effort permanent. I guess, and maybe this has been an answer that was far more detailed than you wanted in the first place, but you know, I think it's also worth mentioning that we actually used some of the new technologies to modernize the way we made our final report public. We actually teamed up with the Government Publishing Office to create and print the report using their XPub technology. The Select Committee is the first congressional committee to use that technology with GPO to produce a committee report that's way more modern, way more user-friendly. In addition to the GPO report, the final report is also on an interactive website to highlight report findings and recommendations. And so again, if you visit modernize congress.house.gov, all of that, and then there's a /final-report that has all of that information that folks can poke around on.
That's great. Thank you for the depth on that. It's very cool to see you guys sort of using those own recommendations and sort of, as they say in the tech world, eating your own dog food. So very cool to hear about that. I'd like to turn now to the pandemic because obviously everybody moved to a point. Some are moving back, but remote work and telework and things of that nature, virtual conferencing, things of that nature have skyrocketed, to put it the least. And we heard stories where the House, the Senate weren't able to hold sessions because they didn't want people to be together. And these technologies were vastly important, except there wasn't the foundational elements in place to support it. So I'd love to talk about, you know, how has the pandemic impacted congressional use of technology, and did it really kind of further emphasize this need to modernize, that really proved the point of having a select committee like this, that you know, Congress, like you said, is an 18th century institution that really needs to be kind of propelled forward?
Yeah, the short answer is big time, right? Once the pandemic hit, you know, Congress went into remote operating status, and to your point, our committee actually decided to keep meeting. We met virtually. We had virtual discussions, you know, looking at issues specifically related to the pandemic and Congress's use of technology, among some other things. We looked at, you know, continuity of committee work, which includes technology. We looked at tech capacity in Congress, because one of the things that became clear pretty early on in the pandemic was, you know, a lot of offices simply did not even have the technology for remote work, and weren't necessarily following best practices with regard to cybersecurity and things like that. We also looked at some of the best practices in state and foreign legislative bodies. You know, some countries were way ahead of the curve and had remote voting systems in place for members of parliament who may, for one reason or another, be unable to travel to their capital. Spain, for example. The state level experiences we found kind of a mixed bag, as you would expect. Some moved quickly and had remote procedures. Others were more resistant.
some states implemented some kind of interesting social distancing practices, like meeting in outdoor sports arenas and that type of thing. So, keep in mind, our committee wasn't tasked with looking specifically at remote voting issues. That was a House admin and House rules conversation. But we tried to look at some of the other issues that kind of were part and parcel of the pandemic. We also took a lot of time to solicit feedback on how remote operations were going from our colleagues and from staff, both in DC and in the districts. I will tell you, prior to the pandemic, we'd already looked at a number of issues around technology and made a number of recommendations that turned out to be pretty helpful as we worked to move to remote operating status. So, for example, things like e-signatures, not requiring a wet signature on everything, because while people are social distancing in the pandemic, that's required. But we had already looked at that issue just as a matter of efficiency. Things like bringing on new House approved technologies like WebEx and rolling out Teams, Microsoft Teams to all staffers. We had made recommendations around trying to expedite the approval of technologies, and to the credit of House admin and of the technologists in the House, there was a quick effort to approve some of those technologies. And then we also had ended up making a whole bunch of recommendations, related to continuity of operations, so that they're, to address things like cybersecurity training and telework training, and the notion that every member of Congress should have training on cybersecurity, on telework. Every office should have a continuity plan and a telework plan. That is just not the case, prior to this pandemic. We made a recommendation around ensuring that staff have the most up-to-date technology and equipment so that they can continue effectively working on behalf of constituents. If you see a disruption, if you have an emergency like this, making sure that there's regular maintenance plans for office technology so that the equipment and technology that's needed during remote operations and to do telework is functional and is cyber secure. We made recommendations around casework. Again, so much of that process is over, kind of hard copy sheets of paper, trying to help constituents access federal agencies and resources, by having secure document management systems, having digital forms, having templates for public access. Those were things that, what's the saying, necessity is the mother of invention. You've started to see that turn over the course of the pandemic. And a lot of those changes, in my view, ought to be made permanent. I guess those are some of the big things. I could go into the weeds on some other stuff, but I think, even looking at how committees, I think at the beginning of each Congress, committees should develop some bipartisan plans on how technology and innovative platforms could be incorporated into daily work. That was one of our recommendations, and I think that's important too.
Great. Well, that's great context for what's been going on, and I think we have a couple more minutes here. What I would like to spend it on, the education and the awareness and the insight of members of Congress on these topics, because as we've seen in some high-profile technology based hearings, we all kind of, our mind draws back to the quote-unquote Facebook hearing where they bring these high-profile CEOs in front, and it's not necessarily the use of the technology, but their sort of awareness and understanding of what's going on around these new solutions and technologies and social medias and things like that are now dominating our society. And there's maybe outside of your own select committee, there doesn't tend to be a great grasp of what's going on. So I wondered your thoughts, and perhaps how your committee, if at all, has thought about educating others around Congress so there's a more meaningful dialogue in how these things, how Congress oversees these things that are starting to really take a major impact on our society.
I think it's really important. You are correct. These are really substantive, important matters, and that Congress needs to have intelligence on. And that can be hard. I came out of the business world. I worked in economic development. And I was a management consultant, in consulting firm's IT practice. And so I had a lot of exposure to these issues, but not, one of the values of Congress is people come from all walks of life. And, and members are pulled in 100 different directions. So understanding and really understanding technology issues takes a lot of time. And oftentimes time is what members of Congress lack. And so some of our recommendations, I think, get us moving in the right direction when it comes to educating ourselves. So for example, we recommended reestablishing an improved Office of Technology Assessment, OTA, to study and recommend emerging technologies, to provide nonpartisan information and policy analysis to member offices. So you're not just leaning on your own staff, but that we're actually building some capacity within the Congress, to support legislative branch agencies as they examine new technologies, to focus on oversight and on policy. All of those things, I think we felt would go a long way in terms of helping members and their staff get more up to speed on technology issues. We also recommended creating a pilot Congressional Leadership Academy for members to offer professional development and institutional training. So, some of our members talked about how they would like to receive more training on technology issues. And so having, it's strange, right now there's mandatory training that members of Congress have to take, but it's one of the few workplaces that I've ever worked in that doesn't really have any professional development opportunities for members. There is a staff academy, and we actually made some proposals around enhancing the staff academy too. But once you've gone through freshman orientation as a member of Congress, there's not much in the way of continuing education, and that should change. It is an opportunity for members of Congress to get better at their jobs, and I think the American people want members of Congress to get better at their jobs. And then finally, as I mentioned, we made a recommendation regarding making cybersecurity training mandatory. Members of Congress are high value targets, and unfortunately, not all members follow best practices in terms of cybersecurity, and you can see very substantial ramifications of that. So we made a recommendation on that front as well.
I think those are great recommendations. Real quickly, as we close out, maybe in a minute or less, I'd like to look ahead to 2021. A lot of this year obviously has been focused on the pandemic, and with, modernization tech issues that, are involved in that. We think of, virtual remote environments, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, things like that. Also, we've heard about social media a lot this year, but what other issues that involve Congress and technology might we, anticipate to come around next year?
I think we're likely to continue to see technology be part of a conversation as it relates to continuity of government operations. And I actually think there's more conversation to have around continuity issues and also around remote work. I think remote work is going to be our reality well into 2021. To its credit, the House has already made a number of adjustments, in part related to the pandemic. So allowing for the use of digital signatures and allowing for committee reports to be submitted electronically, and having the ability for committees to operate remotely and hold hearings and even holding votes if certain requirements are met. But I think we're going to continue to see Congress adapt and adjust. And I think this, is also going to be the case when it comes to communicating with our constituents. Members are adapting more innovative approaches to staying in touch with their constituents. And I think we'll see these discussions around technologies and best practices continue to evolve. At least I hope so.
That's great. Congressman Kilmer, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to watching closely to see what comes of your committee's work.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. And again, I encourage everybody to check out modernizecongress.house.gov.
Absolutely.
Thank you, FedScoop, for hosting AI Week. My name is Andrew Fairbanks, and I'm the General Manager of Federal Services at IBM. And I'm really delighted to take part in the dialogue this week about artificial intelligence and the ways in which it can be harnessed to help solve government problems. It's been a pleasure watching other videos in this series, hearing about all the great work that's going on across the government. In today's session, I'd like to share with you three main themes. One is IBM's view of where we are at in the evolution of artificial intelligence, highlighting some tangible examples of government agencies and the work they're doing in this space. I'd then like to share with you our view of where we think the field is going, both in the short term over the next 3 to 5 years, and then longer term. And finally, I'd like to share with you an ethical framework that I hope we as a society can adopt as we confront the power of what technology is able to do, and that we put the right constraints on that as we move forward. So first, I'd like to just level set and make sure that we're all starting with a common definition of what artificial intelligence is. Put simply, artificial intelligence is capability of a piece of technology to receive a series of data inputs, to make sense of those inputs, and then to use that data to either drive towards a decision or to make an action, and to do that without direct human intervention. At IBM, we call this cognitive computing because the ways in which computer systems process that is very similar to the way the human brain works. IBM has been at the forefront of this field for more than 50 years. It started with the work we were doing to get the Saturn rockets back and forth to the moon, and has then gone through a number of different phases as we've worked through it. We think of 3 layers of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is sort of what we began back in the 50s, which was really using computing systems to really perform large-scale computational tasks at a rate and speed and volume that the human brain simply wasn't able to accomplish. That's the kind of technology we used in getting the rockets back and forth to the moon. Machine learning then takes that a level deeper and creates a series of algorithms that continuously learn from real world experience and outcomes to constantly refine themselves and improve, to then drive those same kind of decision support and that same kind of triggered actions that we see in artificial intelligence. And deep learning then takes it to the very next level, which really gets up into the layer of functioning that's more akin to the brain. We're using neural networks and multiple senses, the ability for the computers to see visual data, to hear auditory data, to be pulling in data from all different layers stacked on top of each other to be able to make decisions and take complex actions. We also think about AI as being in sort of 3 major categories. Narrow AI sort of exists today. It includes deep learning. It tends to be focused on a single task that really drives either a volume of activity that's well beyond what people can perform, or with some degree of increased accuracy. One of my favorite examples in this space is work we're doing with the Transportation Security Administration, applying cognitive techniques and artificial intelligence to the scans that we do of luggage, for example, at the terminal. And data has shown that by helping and train computer systems to begin to recognize patterns of a gun, a knife, or other kinds of contraband, the system can actually perform that task at a much higher fidelity than even people focused on the task can do. The second area that we focus on, which is becoming more commonplace now, but we're on the cusp of a real explosion here, is what we call broad AI, which becomes more disruptive and pervasive. And this is where you can begin to use the neural networks that I mentioned earlier to perform multitask, multi-domain, multimodal kind of work, taking in sensor data, taking in data from all different kinds of areas to again enable an action to be taken. Some of the work the Department of Defense is doing around Project Maven, I think, is a great example of this, where you have IoT sensors all around the world that are being used to help improve the performance of drones and autonomous vehicles. That's sort of the current version of where we're at with AI. And then I think as we move forward, there's the chance for general AI, which I think if you think 2050 and beyond, and you start to envision sort of robots or complex machines that can actually interact with you in much the same way you might interact with a human to perform a function, where they can not only do just purely programmed tasks, but where they can begin to do those tasks autonomously, often very complex tasks. And perhaps they will even be able to begin using moral reasoning and other kinds of techniques as they move forward. That's where we see the world of AI and machine learning going at this point. But I think when we think forward 20 years, I'm sure we haven't even begun to imagine what will be possible. I like to think back 20 years and to think back to the mid 90s, before email became pervasive, before the cell phone became pervasive, before the internet really had really taken hold. Think about how much our world has changed over the last 20 years. And I don't think many of us at that time could have anticipated the world we live in today. I'm sure the pace of change is going to be very similar in this world of AI and machine learning as we move forward. As I mentioned, IBM has sort of been at this task for about 50 years. Again, we started with sort of some of the very narrow tasks. The 1958 slide or shot you see there really is from work we did with the space program, which was, again, creating the instrumentation that got those rockets back and forth to the moon. It's amazing to think back on that time, because if you think about that instrumentation unit, it actually had less memory than some Hallmark greeting cards have today. But they were able, through brute force and analog devices, to be able to perform some of those tasks. We then took on a series of grand challenges, really focused on increasingly complex games, which I think have represented different milestones in the development of artificial intelligence. We began with a computer program back in the early 90s to win the game of backgammon. We then graduated to chess. I think many of you may remember the Deep Blue back in the mid 90s, when ultimately the computer beat Garry Kasparov in a game of chess. And then we progressed into 2011, where we famously developed the Watson system that beat all of the grand champions in Jeopardy, and by a pretty convincing margin. Today, in 2019 and 20, we're focused on other challenges. So 2019, we focused on creating a system that could actually engage in conversation with people in a way that would sort of win the Turing test, and where a person engaging with that machine would not be able to tell whether they were actually engaging with a human or a computer. And this year, we have a really exciting challenge, which we call the Mayflower Project, where we have a completely autonomous ship that is traversing the oceans around the world, doing all kinds of research without a single person engaged in that. It's a solar-powered, AI-powered machine that ends up doing all of that's powered by edge computing, by intelligent automation, live feeds to our weather company data, so that it can make informed choices about for upcoming weather, upcoming wind, how to avoid challenges, and can make all of those kinds of human choices that captains and crews often make in navigating a ship to actually perform a mission entirely autonomously. And to me, I think this picture sort of reflects kind of where we've come in the world of artificial intelligence. When you think back to 1997 in chess, we were really focused on challenges that had very well-defined set of rules, a finite set of possible moves, and one very clear outcome. And we were able to harness the power of technology to solve that challenge, sort of a classic computer problem. By the time we got to Jeopardy, it was a very different challenge, right? When you think about that game, you need systems that can understand nuance and idiom, plays on words, and have just a rich background in all of this cultural data to be able to draw out answers. And it had to be able to do that in very short time period in order to win the time battle against the competition. And it had to also be able to calculate sort of its certainty with an answer in terms of understanding whether or not it wanted to bid. So really a phenomenal challenge. And we won that, right? That's where AI has started to mature within the past few years. And now we're taking on the challenge of these autonomous ships. And if you just think about all the complexity that goes along with doing that, we now have the capability with artificial intelligence to be able to do that. Exciting times. We're using multiple techniques in terms of how we do this, right? Systems are able to do language translation, we're able to do speech transcription, to drive natural language processing and the engagements. That's why this technology has become so popular in the world of customer service and help desks, because chatbots and agents are now able to respond to citizen questions in real time with an incredible level of accuracy, which allows agencies to perform the work much more efficiently. This is all done through being able to draw entities and relations between facts, patterns, using object detection, facial recognition, all these different kinds of techniques that are really enabling very complex processes to be done using these tools. Many examples within government that I think are exciting. And I think particularly in the areas of case management, in terms of predictive maintenance, any use case that really is manually intensive, paper-based, rules-based, is a great candidate for adoption of AI. I wanted to share a few examples with you of where this is really working well. The Veterans Administration is using this for its mail automation. It gets hundreds of thousands of packets of mail every day. And this creates a real bottleneck in terms of the processing of benefits and backlogs for people to receive the benefits they need. What we've been able to do is to automate that process so that we can digitize that information using optical character recognition, populate that into data elements that can be used to make decisions, and to use algorithms to actually process downstream information. It's saving hundreds of man years of work and significantly reducing the backlog on that key function. Social Security Administration is using this for a similar way in terms of benefits adjudication. And the Patent and Trademark Office is using it also to be able to help people filing for patents and for adjudicators in making their decisions. Again, AI is a great tool for anything that has a vast corpus of data that needs to be sorted through quickly to help drive a decision consistent with known rules. So in terms of the path to the broader AI, there's a few things that I think are really needed as a platform. The first is you need sort of explainable data. Again, a set of business rules, the corpus of data that you can use to be able to train a system to be able to answer questions. Security is also really important. As we move towards more mission critical systems, it's both important to protect the data that exists in these systems, but also when you think about the world of drones and autonomous vehicles, or the security of power plants and the power grid, you need to be able to secure that and protect it from hacks. And then ethics, which I'll get into a bit. You know, the more we go down this path, the more ethical situations we confront that we need to be mindful of. So we have created an ethical framework that we really think is important for government decisions, or for governments using AI to make sure we're protecting. You know, one of the areas that's come into focus this year is the whole area of facial recognition and some of the racial bias that exists in the technology today. You can also imagine, as we get more military autonomous vehicles, that, you know, decisions around whether to fire or not fire really end up becoming life and death in cases of global stability. So we're of the mind that we need an environment where this is decision support and not replacing humans, particularly in those areas where there really are ethical and moral concerns. And we believe that to optimize the power of AI while operating within those constraints requires data governance and privacy, an understanding of where there is human or moral agency required to make that a decision support model, and to provide transparency and explainability and accountability for all decisions. So as we move forward into the next 5 years, I think that's going to become even more important, right? As we get into the areas of, or the capability of robotics in the future, and of entities being able to perform these complex tasks, it's going to become really important that we end up governing these actions with that ethical framework as we move forward. As we move forward, I think the changes that we ultimately see coming in the world around the corner are around unsupervised learning and federated learning. AI to date really has been around humans training models based on existing data that then allow downstream decisions to be made. Unsupervised learning is when the systems are actually able to draw these inferences from unstructured data themselves and to provide that context to others. And federated learning is flipping the model in terms of how things are typically done today, where data flows from outside systems into one system where decisions are made and then pushed out. The needs that we're seeing from agencies now are really making decisions out on the edge, pushing the algorithms and the capability out to those sensors and devices that are out in the world to allow that activity to occur there, rather than having to bring everything in and then push back out. These are going to open incredible possibilities, I think, for transforming how we work across all agencies. And I look forward to seeing what it becomes. Thank you again for your time today. If any of you are interested in talking more about AI and machine learning and the opportunities for transforming how your agency works, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Thanks again.
I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you, Goldie, for inviting me. And I know that you've had a wonderful experience with FedTalk and hearing from all the wonderful speakers and sharing their insights. So I'm excited to share with you some of the priorities that DHS is doing moving forward, especially as it relates to the federal data strategy and what the department is doing in that particular area. I know you've covered a lot of topics, especially dealing with artificial intelligence. So I also want to talk a little bit about a pilot program that we're going to be running so that we can test some of the algorithms associated with artificial intelligence as well, that our Chief Technology Officer has been working on. So with that, I really would like to share several of the things that the department has been doing. I know a lot of times people have asked, you know, how has this worked? You started in the middle of the pandemic. And I will have to say that it has been an exciting time because based on all the work that my predecessors have done, we really, senior leadership, it's very rare when you get to come in as a CIO and people are thanking you about how wonderful your staff has performed, how they have provided the ability for the team to pivot, for the department to be able to provide the telework service. And a lot of this comes through things that we've talked about, such as network modernization and cloud first strategy, and all of those types of initiatives that have so much meaning for us. And now what we really want to do is move to the next phase and talk about how we can leverage the data that the department has here so that our senior leadership and our department as a whole can use data to make key decisions and rely upon the data and have data integrity. And so, as you know, the administration did put out an executive order as it relates to artificial intelligence. The departments and agencies are moving out on that. And then we are also moving out on the federal data strategy. In particular, DHS now, we are in the process of recruiting a chief data officer. And so we will be building out a new office within the Office of the Chief Information Officer, which will be the Chief Data Officer. This position is in the process of building out the partnerships here within the department and also within our CXO community, which we call the Management Directorate. And so, as you know, there are our lines of business here. So we have Chief Human Capital Officer, we have the Chief Procurement Officer, we have the Chief Security Officer, the Chief Financial Officer. All of those involve a lot of data. And then in particular, our partner, the Chief Financial Officer, also has the performance piece and the planning and evaluation piece under the Data Act. And so this office will have that key relationship and that key partnership about building that out, not only within our CXO community, but also within our components. So we are structured and we are moving out with the Chief Data Officer Council internally within the department here. It will be part and it will also be led by my office, but also with the Chief Information Technology Officers and the Chief Information Officers. And the key relationship within the department and within my office will be with the Chief Technology Officer, because there are things that we're moving forward with that's where our enterprise architecture efforts are. And so we are building out in a rapid pace segment architectures, which then allow us to be able to look at things like enterprise management service so that we can manage our risk accordingly. That's also going to have to involve the data and the management and the use of the data. Information sharing, as you know, working across all the components, and how that's going to work and making sure there's a proper governance structure in there as we're doing applications and moving toward the cloud. So there's a lot of pieces that are related to that, and we're very excited about building out this new office and recruiting this new person who will be our Chief Data Officer here at the department. There's one other piece that I would like to talk just a little bit about, and that is a pilot effort that we have underway, because digital services are also part of the CIO's office. And so what we're really looking at is how we can do contact tracing for our employees, as well as mapping that up with public health information, and then also as it relates to vaccination distribution. Because what we really need to have is a dashboard that's going to be able to utilize this data, and then for our senior leadership to be able to do some predictive modeling and be able to say, okay, well, initially when we start deploying some of these resources, we're going to know intuitively where it needs to go, but we're not necessarily going to know exactly how different things happen as different outbreaks, as the virus could scale back up, how different things could affect that. And so this small pilot that we're going to be running, that they are helping us to develop, and the team is working on it now with the component organizations as well as the CXOs. This is pretty exciting for us, and will be a small demonstration project that we can really show how we can leverage the learning algorithms and machine learning and apply how we can use all these different data sources so that our senior leadership can make the key decisions that they need to make. The last piece that I want to talk about is the human capital piece. So I would be remiss, every opportunity I get, I talk about this, which is the cyber talent management system. And so this is for the Department of Homeland Security in partnership with our Chico office to build out the DHS cybersecurity service. And this is really going to take us into the next evolution of federal service. And we are in the final processes of publishing those orders so that we can move forward and we can be competitive with private industry and actually do a series of assessments based on the NICE framework. But these assessments for the employees when they come in, we'll put them on a fast track. So they won't have to know things such as you have to go to USA Jobs and know that it's a 2210 series, and then look for the parentheticals for areas that you're interested in. What you'll actually go through is pick a different type of area, say forensics analysis. And then you would actually be able to go through, do the assessments, and it'll map you up to a career path. And so we are anticipating that that pilot will happen in the spring of 21. And so we're very excited about that as well. And again, a lot of the information that we will learn from that, we will be working with the Chico's office, because again, I'm back to the data and how we can be innovative with the tools that we have here so that we can get the right workforce that the department needs to have. So again, I hope you had a wonderful FedTalks adventure. And Goldie, I thank you again for inviting me to be the keynote speaker here at the end of the FedTalks. And I hope everybody's inspired to go out and innovate for the American people.
A giant thank you to all of our incredible speakers this week. We hope you enjoyed FedTalks 2020. All of these sessions are now available on demand. I'd like to take a moment to thank our Diamond sponsors once again for all of their support. AWS, Dell Technologies, Google Cloud, IBM, Intel, Leidos, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Qualtrics, Salesforce, SUSE, VMware, and Worldwide Technology. Thank you for all your support. Thank you all for joining us this week. Save your spot for FedTalks 2021. But in the meantime, we'll see you again soon. Bye.